Welcome to a place where time slows down and the heavy mist of the past gently rolls in to replace the chaos of your day. Tonight, as the embers of the fireplace crackle soft and low, we are stepping back into a world completely removed from our own. A world governed by different laws, different faiths, and fundamentally a different understanding of existence. Close your eyes, let the warmth of the fire settle over you, and listen. We often look at history through the lens of grand battles and political treaties, but the truest, most intimate history of humanity is written on the canvas of human identity itself. Tonight we uncover how people in the medieval era perceived the human form. Imagine walking through the damp, stone-walled corridors of a 14th century castle. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax candles and wood smoke. In the dim light, a noblewoman sits before a polished silver mirror. She is not preparing her face to fit modern ideals, but rather she is sculpting herself to reflect the rigorous spiritual and social expectations of the Middle Ages. To understand medieval beauty, one must understand that to the medieval mind, the physical body was merely a temporary vessel for the eternal soul. Therefore, physical appearance was never just about vanity. It was deeply intertwined with morality, religion, and social hierarchy. A beautiful face was thought to be a direct reflection of a pure and pious soul, while physical flaws were often wrongly viewed with suspicion, as if the inner character were bleeding through the skin. This brings us to one of the most striking and distinctive trends of the high medieval period, the high, expansive forehead. In courts across Europe, from the sun-drenched halls of Aquitaine to the foggy castles of England, a large, prominent forehead was considered the ultimate sign of intelligence, nobility, and high birth. It signified a mind untouched by manual labour, a life lived in contemplation and privilege. To achieve this look, women went to extraordinary lengths. They would systematically pluck or shave their hairlines back by inches, moving the natural boundary of their hair far past the crown of the head. The process was painstaking, done in the quiet isolation of their private chambers, using tweezers made of iron or silver, and sometimes harsh topical mixtures made of quicklime and vinegar to prevent the hair from growing back. As you listen to the rhythmic crackle of the fire, picture the dedication required for such a standard. The eyebrows, too, were often completely plucked away, leaving the face looking open, ethereal, and almost otherworldly, like the painted faces of angels on the illuminated manuscripts crafted by silent monks. This look altered the entire geometry of the human expression. Without eyebrows or a natural hairline, the eyes and the structure of the skull became the central focus. It created an illusion of permanent serenity, a detachment from the earthly struggles of the common folk who laboured under the sun. The skin itself had to tell a story of absolute separation from the outside world. Today, a sun-kissed tan is often associated with leisure and health. In the medieval era, it was the exact opposite. A tan meant you were a peasant, someone doomed to work the fields, harvesting wheat and tending livestock under the harsh glare of the seasons. Nobility, therefore, demanded a complexion as pale as alabaster, smooth and unblemished, suggesting that the individual had never spent a single day exposed to the elements or forced into physical toil. This desire for paleness led to the widespread use of cosmetics that were secretly hazardous, yet deeply coveted, a topic that began to reshape the social dynamics of the medieval court, creating a silent competition among the elite to see who could project the most flawless, ghostly grace. The channel Sleepy History with Kevin is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. To maintain this ghostly, revered paleness, medieval noblewomen turned to substances that were as dangerous as they were effective. In the quiet chambers of the estate, away from the prying eyes of church inquisitors, ladies and their maids mixed powders made from white lead. This compound, known as ceruse, was prized for its ability to create an opaque, porcelain-like mask over the skin, effectively hiding any imperfections, scars from childhood illnesses, or the natural signs of aging. They would apply it thinly over their faces and necks, creating a striking contrast with the heavy, rich velvet and silk robes they wore. But this pursuit of an angelic appearance came with a hidden, devastating cost. The white lead was slowly absorbed through the skin, leading to chronic poisoning. Over months and years, it caused the very skin it was meant to beautify to wither, dry out, and develop deep sores. It loosened the teeth and caused the breath to turn foul, creating a tragic irony where the pursuit of ultimate physical perfection led directly to physical decay. Yet the social pressure to embody this ideal was so immense that the use of ceruse persisted for generations, handed down as a secret recipe from mothers to daughters among the ruling classes. At the same time, the medieval church viewed these practices with deep suspicion and outright hostility. Preachers from the pulpits frequently delivered fiery sermons condemning cosmetics as an affront to the Creator. To the medieval theologian, changing one's appearance was tantamount to telling God that his craftsmanship was flawed. They argued that a woman who painted her face was practicing a form of deception, wearing a mask crafted by the devil to lure unsuspecting souls into the sin of lust. Written records from the 12th and 13th centuries contain countless warnings from monks who painted vivid, terrifying pictures of the afterlife, where women who used makeup were punished by having their faces scraped with iron claws. Despite these terrifying warnings from the spiritual authorities, the allure of status and the desire to conform to courtly love ideals proved far more powerful than the fear of hellfire. The courtly culture of the High Middle Ages, celebrated by travelling troubadours in their romantic poems, demanded that a lady be an untouchable, radiant beacon of beauty. She was described in songs as having skin like lilies, cheeks like roses, and eyes that held the brightness of stars. To achieve the rose-coloured tint on the cheeks and lips without drawing too much ire from the local priest, women used more natural, albeit temporary, remedies. They rubbed crushed safflower, red ochre, or the root of the alkanet plant into their skin, creating a delicate, flushed look that mimicked the natural blush of youth and health. This contrast between the stark white skin and the subtle red tint on the lips created a visual language that everyone in medieval society could instantly read. It was a language of wealth, showing that you had the resources to acquire imported ingredients, the leisure time to spend hours on grooming, and the social standing to ignore the harshest decrees of the church. The bedroom of a medieval lady became a laboratory of early chemistry and botany, filled with small ceramic pots, glass vials, and dried herbs gathered from the castle gardens. They experimented with washes made of crushed pearls, strawberry juice, and almond oil, seeking any advantage in the competitive arena of the royal court, where a successful marriage alliance could alter the destiny of entire kingdoms. As the fire in your room continues to burn, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls, imagine the silent tension of this era, a world where every choice in clothing, every shade of skin, and every plucked hair was a calculated statement of who you were, where you belonged, and how much power your family held. The pursuit of beauty was not a trivial pastime. It was a serious, sometimes fatal strategy for survival and advancement in a world where security was fragile and appearance was everything. While the women of the medieval courts navigated the dangerous waters of cosmetics and clerical condemnation, the men were subject to their own strict standards of appearance, standards that evolved drastically as the centuries progressed. In the early medieval period, the ideal man was defined almost entirely by brute strength, physical endurance, and martial prowess. A warrior needed to be broad-shouldered, heavily built, and bearing the honourable scars of conflict. However, with the rise of courtly love and the chivalric code in the 12th and 13th centuries, the definition of masculine beauty underwent a profound transformation. The rough, unkempt warrior of the past was replaced by the refined, elegant knight. Masculine beauty in the high medieval court became a delicate balance between athletic capability and artistic grace. A noble gentleman was expected to have long, flowing, and meticulously curled hair. Blonde hair was particularly prized for men, just as it was for women, as it was associated with the solar radiance of kingship and the purity of biblical heroes. Young noblemen would spend hours having their hair washed with scented waters, combed and curled with heated iron rods. To have straight, limp hair was seen as a sign of a dull mind and a low social standing. This emphasis on hair extended to the face. While beards went in and out of fashion depending on the preferences of the reigning monarch, they were always carefully managed. A well-groomed beard was a symbol of wisdom, maturity and authority, but it had to be trimmed precisely. If a man chose to go clean-shaven, his skin was expected to be smooth, requiring barbers to use heavy straight razors and soothing oils made from bay leaves and animal fats to prevent irritation. The face of a courtly man had to project an air of effortless nobility, showing that he was just as capable of reciting poetry and dancing the carol in the great hall as he was of breaking lances on the tournament field. The clothing of medieval men also became a powerful tool for displaying the physical form, often to a degree that shocked the elder generations and conservative churchmen. By the 14th century, the loose, flowing tunics of the past were cast aside in favour of extremely tight-fitting garments called doublets and pourpoints. These jackets were heavily padded in the chest and shoulders to create an exaggerated, powerful upper body, while narrowing sharply at the waist to emphasise a slender, athletic silhouette. Below the waist, men wore tightly tailored hose that clung closely to the contours of their legs. Long, shapely and muscular legs became one of the most celebrated features of masculine beauty, viewed as a sign of excellent horsemanship and physical vigour. To further elongate their appearance, noblemen adopted the fashion of poulines, shoes with absurdly long pointed toes that could extend several inches or even feet past the actual foot. These points were sometimes stuffed with moss or reinforced with whalebone to keep them upright, turning a simple walk across a stone floor into a stylized rhythmic performance. The church, unsurprisingly, viewed these tight clothes and elongated shoes with absolute disdain, declaring them to be arrogant, unnatural, and overtly vain. Chroniclers wrote scathing critiques of young men who could barely bend their knees to pray because their trousers were so tight, accusing them of prioritizing courtly vanity over spiritual salvation. Yet, just like the noblewomen, the men of the aristocracy understood that appearance was an essential currency in the political landscape of the Middle Ages. A king's favour, a strategic marriage alliance, or the respect of one's peers often depended on the image one projected. A knight who appeared physically flawless, dressed in the finest imported Italian silks and Flemish wools, commanded an unspoken authority. His body was a walking manifestation of his family's wealth and lineage. As you listen to the steady, calming crackle of the wood fire, contemplate how these men walked a constant tightrope, balancing the brutal, bloodless demands of political power with the soft, highly aestheticized world of the royal court. Beyond the structure of the face and the fit of the clothing, there was another hidden dimension to medieval beauty standards that deeply influenced daily interactions: the scent of a person and the cleanliness of their smile. There is a common modern misconception that the people of the Middle Ages lived in absolute filth, completely neglecting their personal hygiene. While it is true that they lacked modern plumbing and synthetic cosmetics, the ruling classes in particular were profoundly obsessed with maintaining clean teeth and sweet-smelling breath, viewing them as essential markers of high breeding and moral purity. In the high societies of medieval Europe, a bright, healthy smile was a rare and highly valued asset. Because diets were often heavy in stone-ground grains, which contained tiny particles of grit from the millstones, the teeth of the common people were frequently worn down, chipped, or decayed. Therefore, a set of white, even teeth was a luxury that belonged almost exclusively to those who could afford specialized care and a more refined diet. To maintain their teeth, Noblemen and ladies used early forms of tooth powder made from burnt rosemary, powdered sage, and crushed charcoal. They would rub these mixtures vigorously against their teeth, using small strips of clean linen cloth, polishing away the stains left by wine and meats. Breath was considered a direct extension of a person's inner state. A foul-smelling breath was not just an unpleasant inconvenience. It was viewed as a sign of internal physical rot, or worse, a manifestation of spiritual corruption. In medieval literature, demons and villains were invariably described as possessing a wretched sulphuric breath, while saints and angels were said to exhale the sweet aroma of lilies and roses. To ensure their breath matched their high social standing, aristocrats chewed on imported spices such as cloves, cardamom, and cinnamon throughout the day. They also rinsed their mouths with homemade concoctions made of white wine infused with mint, vinegar, and aniseed, creating a refreshing, sharp scent that lingered during intimate conversations in the court. This preoccupation with scent extended to the entire body, while full immersion baths were a laborious process requiring servants to haul dozens of buckets of water from outdoor wells and heat them over open fires. They were treated as major, luxurious rituals in noble households. These baths were not simple, functional acts of cleaning, they were sensory experiences. The water was heavily infused with aromatic herbs and flowers, lavender, chamomile, rose petals, and bay leaves, which served to cleanse the skin and impart a long-lasting natural fragrance to the body. After bathing, the skin was rubbed with precious oils imported from the East, turning the physical body into a moving vessel of pleasant perfume. For those days when a full bath was not possible due to travelling or the deep chill of winter, the elite relied on the spot cleaning of their hands, face, and necks, using scented waters. They understood that the accumulation of sweat and grime detracted from the ethereal, untouched image they wished to project. A person's scent was their invisible coat of arms, announcing their presence in a crowded room before they even spoke a word. It drew a sharp, undeniable boundary between the courtly elite, who smelled of exotic spices and fresh flowers, and the labouring peasantry who were permanently tied to the earth, smelling of smoke, sweat, and animal husbandry. As you rest in the deep quiet of the night, listening to the gentle rhythmic sighing of the fireplace, let your mind drift through these ancient corridors. Consider how every single aspect of the human presentation, from the whiteness of a tooth to the specific aroma of a garment, was carefully curated to signal prestige, power, and an elevated existence far above the harsh realities of the natural world. All stories on this channel, Sleepy History with Kevin, are fictional, thoughtfully crafted around historical themes and inspired by real events, figures, and periods, reimagined for engaging storytelling. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, but documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, book or events is purely coincidental. In the grand tapestry of medieval aesthetics, colour was never neutral. Every hue worn on the body or found in nature carried a profound symbolic weight, and nowhere was this more apparent than in the cultural obsession with hair colour. Among the courts of Western Europe, blonde hair was heralded as the absolute pinnacle of beauty, virtue, and divine favour. It was the colour of the sun, of gold, and of the crowns worn by earthly monarchs who claimed their right to rule by divine decree. In the illuminated manuscripts created by cloistered monks, angels, and Virgin Mary were almost universally depicted with shimmering golden tresses. To possess natural blonde hair was to be blessed by birth, carrying an unspoken aura of innocence and nobility. For those who were not naturally blessed with golden locks, the desire to achieve this celestial look drove them to invent complex, chemical hair lightening methods. Women would spend hours sitting on the flat roofs of their stone castles or in high, sunlit balconies, exposing their hair to the intense summer sun after soaking it in various natural bleaches. They mixed potions using saffron, stale urine, sulfur and celandine roots, applying these pungent mixtures to their hair to strip away the darker pigments. This dedication to shifting one's natural features demonstrates just how deeply embedded these symbols were in the medieval psyche. A person was willing to endure hours of discomfort and foul odours just to align their physical appearance with the cultural ideal of spiritual purity. If you're enjoying this tranquil journey through the hidden corners of history, and if the crackle of the fire is bringing a sense of calm to your night, please take a gentle moment to support the channel. You can subscribe, leave a peaceful like, or share your thoughts in the comments below. Your presence here helps keep these stories alive, weaving a quiet space for rest and learning in a busy world. Now, let us drift back into the shadows of the past. While blonde hair was celebrated as divine, another hair colour was viewed with deep suspicion, fear, and outright hostility: red hair. In the collective mind of medieval Europe, red hair was inextricably linked to deception, wild untamed passions, and bad omens. This deep-seated prejudice was largely fueled by religious iconography. Across centuries of medieval art, Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus, was almost always depicted with vibrant, fiery red hair and a matching beard. Consequently, people born with red hair were often unfairly cast as naturally untrustworthy, hot-tempered, or inherently prone to sin. In the darker corners of medieval superstition, red hair was also associated with the supernatural and the demonic. It was whispered in village taverns and castle courtyards alike that those with red hair possessed an unstable nature, or that they were marked by ancient pagan forces that the church had tried so desperately to eradicate. This created a harsh social reality for red-haired individuals who had to constantly navigate a world that viewed their very genetic makeup as a physical manifestation of a moral flaw. The natural diversity of the human body was squeezed into a rigid framework of religious allegory, where every feature was a sign and every colour was a sermon. As the night deepens and the fire settles into a steady, comforting glow, consider the heavy burden of these perceptions. Imagine walking through a world where your appearance did not just invite compliments or critiques, but instead determined your perceived standing before God and man. A world where a single shade of hair could open the doors to royal favour or lock you into a lifetime of suspicion and isolation. The human face and body were the ultimate battlegrounds of ideology, reflecting the grand, complex anxieties of an era trying to find divine order in a chaotic world. As we observe the image of the medieval elite, we must look beyond the face and the hair to a part of the body that spoke volumes without uttering a single word: the hands. In the rigid class structure of the Middle Ages, the hands were the ultimate indicator of a person's social destiny and daily reality. They were a physical ledger recording every hour of labour or every privilege of leisure. For the nobility, both men and women, the possession of soft, smooth and long-fingered hands was an absolute aesthetic requirement, serving as undeniable proof that they belonged to the ruling class. To the medieval mind, a beautiful hand was one that had never known the harsh bite of manual labour. It was a hand that had never held a plough, tilled the muddy earth, or scrubbed a stone floor with lye. Instead, the hands of a noble gentleman or lady were meant to be delicate, pale, and untouched by the elements. Long, slender fingers were highly romanticised in the poetry of the era, described by troubadours as moving like elegant white swans through the air. These hands were meant for higher, more refined tasks, turning the delicate vellum pages of an illuminated book, playing the lute, holding a falcon during a royal hunt, or signing treaties that sealed the fate of provinces. To maintain the pristine condition of their hands, the aristocracy employed various protective measures and treatments. Gloves became a crucial accessory, worn not just for warmth during the bitter European winters, but as a permanent symbol of status during the milder seasons. Made from the finest, softest kid skin, lambskin, or imported silks, these gloves protected the skin from the friction of horse reins and the staining effects of the outdoor world. Inside the privacy of their solar rooms, noblewomen would treat their hands with expensive ointments crafted from almond oil, rosewater and white wax, smoothing away any slight roughness to ensure their touch remained as soft as silk. The nails, too, were a focus of careful grooming. They were kept neatly trimmed and scrubbed completely clean of any dirt or residue. A stained or broken nail was looked upon with immense disdain in the royal courts, as it immediately broke the illusion of untouchable perfection that the nobility worked so hard to maintain. Conversely, the common labourers, peasants and craftsmen bore hands that were permanently transformed by their occupations. Their skin was thick, calloused, scarred and deeply stained by soil, iron or dyes. In the eyes of the elite, these rough hands were not just a consequence of hard work, they were viewed as a physical manifestation of a lower moral and social order. This profound division in the appearance of the hands reinforced the medieval belief in the great chain of being, the idea that God had intentionally structured society into distinct unchangeable tiers. The soft, pale hand of the lord was seen as naturally designed to rule, while the heavy, scarred hand of the serf was meant to serve. When a knight offered his hand to a lady, or when a king extended his hand to be kissed by a vassal, the physical texture of the skin itself reenacted and solidified the entire political and social hierarchy of the kingdom. As you lie in the quiet warmth of your room, listening to the gentle, steady sighs of the dying embers, reflect on this subtle form of power. Imagine a world where a single glance at a person's fingers could determine how they were treated, how they were judged, and where they stood in the grand order of the world. The human body was not merely an individual possession, but a public statement carefully sculpted to maintain the fragile boundaries of an empire. If the hands were the ledger of social status, the features of the face, specifically the eyes and the mouth, were considered the direct mirrors of the human soul. In the high courts of the medieval world, structural beauty was closely analysed through a rigid framework of symbolic meaning. A lady's eyes were expected to be bright, clear, and filled with a soft, modest light. Dark, flashing eyes were often viewed with a degree of caution, as they were associated with untamed passion or hidden cunning. Instead, the cultural preference leaned heavily toward light-coloured eyes, particularly shades of clear blue or soft grey, which were celebrated in courtly literature as reflections of the serene, unclouded heavens. To enhance the clarity and brightness of their eyes, women resorted to subtle, dangerous methods. They would drop distilled waters made from various herbs, including dangerous nightshade plants like belladonna, directly into their eyes. This caused the pupils to dilate immensely, creating a wide-eyed, striking look that made the eyes appear larger, deeper, and more alluring in the dim, flickering candlelight of the grand halls. This practice, though it caused blurred vision and could lead to permanent blindness over time, was pursued because it mimicked the look of spiritual rapture and emotional intensity praised by the romantic poets of the age. The mouth, on the other hand, carried an entirely different set of expectations, heavily governed by the virtues of restraint and humility. A beautiful mouth in the medieval era was invariably described as small, delicate, and tightly contoured, often compared to a tiny rosebud. A wide mouth or full, expansive lips were actively discouraged and often mocked in the satirical writings of the period, as they were seen as physical indicators of gluttony, talkativeness, and a lack of moral discipline. A small, neatly closed mouth signalled that a person, particularly a woman, possessed the virtue of silence and knew how to govern her speech in a world where words could ignite political ruin or heresy charges. The lips themselves were expected to possess a natural vibrant redness that stood out sharply against the pale alabaster skin of the face. This contrast was not merely an aesthetic preference, it held a deep theological resonance. The combination of white skin and red lips mirrored the symbolic colours of the Christian Church, white for purity, virginity, and innocence, and red for the blood of sacrifice, divine love, and spiritual martyrdom. When a nobleman looked upon a lady with these features, he did not just see a beautiful woman, he saw a walking allegory of the virtues that held the entire medieval universe together. This strict regulation of facial features meant that expressing emotion was also a highly stylized act. To laugh out loud, showing the teeth and widening the mouth, was considered incredibly vulgar and unbefitting of anyone of noble birth. Aristocrats were trained from youth to maintain a calm, measured composure, offering only small, enigmatic smiles that preserved the delicate geometry of their features. Their faces became living sculptures, carefully managed to project an image of eternal peace and unchanging status, entirely detached from the raw, unpredictable realities of everyday life. As the firelight in your room softens, casting a gentle, protective warmth around you, imagine sitting in a crowded medieval hall. Watch the subtle glances exchanged across the room, where the widening of a pupil or the slight curve of a small rosebud mouth spoke volumes in a silent language of power, desire, and piety. It was a world where every feature was a text to be read, and every expression was a calculated move in a grand generational game of survival and prestige. When we expand our gaze from the details of the face to the silhouette of the entire body, we find that the medieval world held a highly specific, structurally rigid ideal for the human form. Unlike the modern obsession with athletic thinness or highly defined muscularity, the Middle Ages celebrated a body shape that directly reflected the social and political obligations of the ruling class. For a noblewoman, the ideal figure was characterized by a high, small bust, slender arms, and a noticeably rounded, gently protruding abdomen. This specific shape, often depicted in medieval paintings and tapestries, was not seen as a sign of being overweight, but rather as the ultimate symbol of fertility and life-giving potential. In an era where the survival of royal lineages and noble estates depended entirely on producing healthy heirs, a woman's body was viewed through the lens of continuity and dynastic security. A slightly rounded stomach was celebrated because it suggested a capacity for motherhood, a physical readiness to carry the future of a kingdom within her. To achieve this silhouette, the tailoring of medieval dresses, particularly the hopelander and the high-waisted gowns of the late 14th century, was deliberately designed to gather fabric tightly just under the bust, allowing the skirts to flow outwards over the abdomen, artificially accentuating this revered, fertile shape. As you listen to these ancient truths, feeling the deep restorative calm of the evening wrap around you like a heavy velvet cloak, take a brief moment to connect with us. If this historical escape is helping you unwind, consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a gentle like, or writing a brief comment about which historical era brings you the most peace. Your quiet support is the fuel that keeps this fireplace burning night after night. Now, let the crackle of the wood guide you back into the past. For men, the ideal posture was one of absolute rectitude and vertical command. A nobleman or knight was expected to stand as straight as an arrow, with his shoulders thrown back, his chest subtly expanded, and his head held high. This was not merely a matter of military bearing, it was a physical manifestation of moral rectitude and social dominance. The medieval word for nobility was intimately tied to the concept of uprightness. To slouch, to lean against walls, or to carry oneself with a curved spine was seen as a definitive sign of a weak will, low birth, or a soul corrupted by laziness. A man's posture had to command a room, projecting an aura of natural authority before he even drew his sword or uttered a command. This emphasis on an upright, stately posture began in early childhood. Children of the nobility were placed in tight, swaddling clothes as infants, based on the medical belief of the time that their bones needed to be physically guided into a straight, noble alignment. As they grew, young pages and squires were subjected to rigorous training exercises, learning to walk with heavy books or wooden boards balanced on their heads, and sitting on hard, backless benches for hours to develop the core strength required for a lifetime of wearing heavy iron armor and sitting majestically on horseback. Their bodies were quite literally molded by social expectation, shaped from the cradle to embody the uncompromising power of their lineage. As the fire in your room burns low, casting long, peaceful shadows that dance across the ceiling, think about the immense discipline behind this medieval silhouette. Every step, every stance, and every curve of the spine was part of a lifelong performance. The body was a public monument, carefully constructed and rigorously maintained to project an illusion of eternal stability, reminding everyone who looked upon them that the aristocracy was born to stand above, to rule, and to endure through the turbulent passage of centuries. To fully understand the manifestation of medieval beauty, one must look at how the physical body was framed and enhanced by the textures of wealth. A beautiful form was not considered complete in its raw natural state. It required the strategic application of precious stones, heavy fabrics, and shimmering metals to elevate it from the earthly realm into something truly magnificent. In the royal courts of Europe, the clothing and adornments worn by the elite were treated as an extension of their physical beauty, creating a visual spectacle where the human body and the treasures of the earth merged into a singular statement of absolute power. This practice was deeply rooted in a medieval philosophical concept known as the theology of light. Scholars and theologians of the era argued that light was the purest, most direct manifestation of the divine on earth. Consequently, anything that could reflect, refract, or amplify light, such as polished gold, clear diamonds, deep red rubies, and vibrant sapphires, was seen as possessing a spark of heavenly perfection. When a queen or a high-ranking duke stepped into the grand hall adorned with heavy gold chains and garments embroidered with thousands of tiny freshwater pearls, they were not merely engaging in a display of vanity. They were wrapping themselves in the very language of the divine, using the brilliance of gemstones to project an aura of spiritual and temporal majesty that left the common observer in absolute awe. The fabrics themselves were selected with immense care, imported along perilous trade routes from the bustling markets of Venice, Byzantium, and the Far East. Heavy velvets that absorbed the dim candlelight, stiff brocades woven with actual silver thread, and flowing silks that shifted colour as the wearer moved through the room were highly coveted. These materials altered the way the human body interacted with its environment. They added weight and volume to the silhouette, making a nobleman appear more imposing and a lady move with a slow, deliberate grace, as the sheer weight of her skirts prevented any sudden, unseemly movements. The clothing dictated the behaviour, enforcing a rhythmic, stately pace that became synonymous with high birth and refined breeding. Furthermore, the specific arrangement of jewellery carried intense political and social meaning. Rings were not just worn on the fingers, but often hung from gold chains around the neck or pinned directly into the elaborate headpieces that bound a woman's hair. Each stone was believed to possess its own unique, mystical properties. Emeralds were thought to preserve chastity and ward off evil spirits, while sapphires protected the wearer from betrayal and envy. To wear these stones was to surround oneself with a protective, metaphysical shield, aligning the physical body with the unseen forces of the cosmos. As you rest in the deep, undisturbed quiet of the night, watching the gentle, flickering dance of the firelight in your room, imagine the sheer sensory impact of this medieval aesthetic. A world where beauty was a dazzling collision of nature and artifice, where the human form was deliberately obscured and elevated by the weight of history's finest treasures. Every clink of a gold chain, every flash of a polished ruby, and every rustle of heavy silk was a calculated note in a grand symphony of dominance, ensuring that the ruling class remained an untouchable, radiant vision in the minds of those who lived in the shadows of their castles. The definitions of medieval beauty were never entirely static. They were fundamentally reshaped by global movements, trade, and the geopolitical collisions of the era. One of the most profound shifts in Western European aesthetics occurred during the centuries of the Crusades, when thousands of knights, lords, and scholars journeyed to the Levant. There, in the sprawling, highly sophisticated cities of the Middle East, Western Europeans came into direct contact with the Islamic world, a civilization that possessed an advanced understanding of medicine, botany, and personal grooming that far surpassed the practices of Western Europe at the time. This cultural collision introduced Western aristocrats to an entirely new world of sensory luxury. Crusaders returned to their cold, stone castles in France, Germany, and England, carrying exotic treasures that would permanently alter courtly life. They brought back delicate rosewater, musk, ambergris, and a vast array of essential oils that offered a complexity of scent previously unknown in the West. Suddenly, the simple herbal washes of the past were replaced by sophisticated layered perfumes that could linger on garments for weeks. The elite became obsessed with these Eastern fragrances, using them to create a sensory atmosphere in their courts that signaled international connection, immense wealth, and a highly refined taste that bridged two entirely different worlds. If the gentle warmth of this crackling fire is helping you find peace tonight, and if these journeys into the deeper layers of history are soothing your mind, please consider joining our quiet community. Take a gentle moment to subscribe to Sleepy History with Kevin. Leave a soft like on this video, or drop a comment sharing how you feel. Your quiet interaction supports this sanctuary of rest, keeping our historical fires burning bright. Now let us return to our journey across the ancient world. Along with perfumes, the Crusades brought back new technologies for skin care and hair care. Western women quickly adopted the use of specialized Eastern clays, almond pastes, and refined sugar scrubs to soften their skin, moving away from some of the more abrasive, toxic chemical mixtures of the early medieval period. They also discovered new botanical dyes that allowed for richer, more nuanced hair tones, and luxurious silk threads that were woven directly into their elaborate braided hairstyles. The ideal of beauty became more global, absorbing the textures, scents, and secrets of distant lands, transforming the medieval European court into a space of international luxury. This influx of Eastern grooming habits did not sit well with the traditional moral guardians of the West. Conservative church chroniclers launched fierce literary attacks against what they viewed as the dangerous, effeminate corruption of Western manhood. They complained bitterly that knights who had spent time in the East were returning home too soft, spending too much time bathing in scented waters, combing their hair, and smelling of exotic perfumes rather than the honest smell of iron and sweat. To these traditionalists, the adoption of foreign beauty standards was seen as a dangerous threat to military readiness and moral integrity, a sign that the rugged warrior spirit of the West was being eroded by the seductive luxuries of the Orient. Yet, despite the loud protests from the pulpits, the allure of these refined practices was unstoppable. The nobility understood that beauty was an evolving language of prestige. To possess the scent of Eastern musk or to wear robes lined with patterned damask silk was to demonstrate that your power extended far beyond the boundaries of your local fiefdom. It showed that your family was a participant in the grand, sweeping history of the wider world. As the fire in your room crackles softly, casting a steady protective light, contemplate how the very way a person looked, smelled, and moved in a medieval hall was a living map of global trade, conflict, and the eternal human desire to transcend the ordinary limits of their birthplace. Beneath the glittering surface of the royal courts and the fierce debates of the theologians, there existed a hidden world of practical science, ancient folklore, and secret medical texts that formed the true backbone of medieval beauty culture. For centuries, knowledge regarding cosmetics, skin remedies, and personal hygiene was not merely passed down through word of mouth. It was meticulously recorded in clandestine manuscripts kept by early physicians, forward-thinking monks, and specialized women healers who operated on the fringes of acceptable society. These texts were the underground blueprints for physical preservation, bridging the dangerous gap between medieval science and forbidden magic. The most famous of these works was a collection of treatises known as the Trotula, compiled in the 11th or 12th century in the sun-drenched Italian city of Salerno, a vibrant center of medieval medical learning, attributed to a brilliant female physician named Trota of Salerno. This revolutionary text became the ultimate handbook for women's health and beauty across Europe. Unlike the harsh sermons of the priesthood that condemned physical grooming as a sin, the trotula treated the care of the body as a legitimate branch of medicine. It argued that maintaining a healthy, clear appearance was essential for a woman's well-being and her dignity within her community, offering practical, natural solutions to the physical ailments of the era. Within the pages of these ancient manuals, one could find highly complex recipes designed to combat the inevitable signs of aging and the harsh toll of the European climate. There were formulas for soothing ointments made from boiled lily roots and honey to erase sun damage, washes crafted from goat's milk and crushed almonds to smooth away wrinkles, and intricate tooth powders made from the ashes of burnt rosemary and marble dust. These texts treated the human body as an intricate garden that required constant, careful cultivation, combining early botanical chemistry with an intuitive understanding of the healing properties of nature. However, possessing and practicing the knowledge found in these manuals was a delicate, often perilous endeavour, because the line between early science and witchcraft was incredibly thin in the medieval mind. A healer or a noblewoman who experimented too openly with complex chemical distillations could easily find herself accused of practicing the dark arts. If a beauty potion contained unusual ingredients, such as the blood of a bat, crushed beetles or herbs gathered only under the light of a full moon, it crossed the boundary from practical medicine into superstition and folk magic. The pursuit of beauty, therefore, required a high degree of secrecy, conducted behind closed doors in private solar chambers or hidden cottage gardens, away from the suspicious eyes of the local parish priest. Yet the universal desire to retain youth, health, and social influence meant that these secret manuals were among the most highly prized and heavily copied documents of the High Middle Ages. Kings, queens, and wealthy merchant families paid small fortunes to scripts and monks to create beautiful hand-copied versions of these texts for their private libraries. They understood that the knowledge contained within these hidden pages was a form of power, a silent weapon that could alter the physical presentation of their lineage, helping them maintain the illusion of untouchable, timeless nobility in a world that was otherwise fragile, unpredictable, and unforgiving. As you drift further into the deep, restorative quiet of the night, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the wood fire, let your mind rest upon these ancient keepers of secrets. Imagine the silent rooms where early scientists and healers worked by candlelight, measuring out drops of rose oil and crushing dried herbs to defy the passage of time. They left behind a legacy of human resilience, proving that even in the darkest, most structured eras of history, the desire to cultivate grace, health, and beauty remained an unquenchable spark in the human spirit. This content is inspired by and adapted from public domain works available through Project Gutenberg. The material has been transformed through original narration, editing, and storytelling to create a unique experience for educational and entertainment purposes. As we trace the silhouette of medieval appearance, we cannot ignore the intricate structures that sat atop the head, completely transforming how a person was perceived in public life. In the High and Late Middle Ages, a woman's hair was considered her most potent, alluring, and dangerous asset. Because of its immense sensory power, the Christian Church decreed that once a woman was married, her natural hair must be covered in public as a sign of modesty, humility, and submission to both her husband and God. Yet, in a fascinating display of human ingenuity, the aristocratic women of Europe took this restrictive religious mandate and turned it into the ultimate canvas for high fashion, architectural display, and political rivalry. Instead of simply hiding their hair under plain cloth, noblewomen developed incredibly complex, towering structures known as headdresses. One of the most iconic of these was the hennin, a tall, cone-shaped hat that emerged in the 15th century. Particularly in the wealthy courts of Burgundy and France. These structures could rise anywhere from 1 to 3 feet into the air, constructed from stiffened pasteboard or wire, and covered in luxurious fabrics like silk, damask, velvet, or gold brocade. From the peak of these cones, long sheer veils of fine Flemish linen or Italian silk floated downward, catching the air as the lady walked through the stone corridors, creating an illusion of ethereal height and weightless elegance. To wear a hennin properly required an absolute transformation of the natural face, further reinforcing the medieval obsession with the high forehead. Because the hennin sat far back on the crown of the head, any hair that naturally framed the face had to be completely plucked or shaved away. The ears, too, were hidden beneath the structure or covered by small, delicate silk loops. This created a stark architectural geometry where the human head appeared elongated, smooth, and completely unbothered by the natural irregularities of growth. The face became a perfect, isolated porcelain oval, framed not by soft human hair, but by the rigid, magnificent angles of aristocratic engineering. The heights of these headdresses became a direct language of social rank and political ambition. Laws were eventually passed by royal councils, known as sumptuary laws, to regulate exactly how tall a woman's hennin could be based on her family's income and titles. A duchess could wear a structure far taller and more decorated than the wife of a knight, turning every gathering in the great hall into a silent, visual battle of status. Women literally measured their family's power by the inches of fabric rising above their brows, navigating low castle doorways with a practiced, elegant tilt of the neck that required immense core strength and a lifelong training in courtly posture. In other parts of Europe, different structures dominated the landscape of beauty. In England, ladies favoured the gable headdress, a rigid, pointed structure that resembled the roofline of a house, framing the face in a geometric frame of dark velvet and gold embroidery. In Italy, where the influence of the church was balanced by the vibrant, humanist spirit of early merchant republics, women wore lighter, softer coverings, choosing to weave heavy strands of pearls, ribbons, and gold wire directly through their intricate braids, exposing more of their natural hair while still conforming to the basic social expectations of the era. As you rest in the deepening quiet of your room, listening to the slow, rhythmic dying of the fire, imagine observing a royal procession through these ancient halls. Watch how these towering silhouettes moved through the dim candlelight, shifting the shadows on the stone walls. It was a world where even a religious restriction meant to encourage humility was transformed into an instrument of profound pride, artistic expression, and political dominance. The human body was never left to its own devices. It was constantly sculpted, framed, and elevated, turning the act of simply existing into a grand historical performance that testified to the enduring power of ambition and grace. As the centuries rolled forward and the structural complexity of medieval society deepened, the definition of beauty became increasingly defensive, merging with the primal need for survival in an unpredictable world. This intersection of aesthetics, health, and status is perfectly embodied in one of the most intimate and luxurious objects a medieval aristocrat could own, the pomander. Derived from the French term pomme d'ambre, meaning apple of amber, the pomander was a small, ornately crafted sphere made of gold, silver, or ivory, designed to open like the segments of an orange. Inside each segment, precious resins, dried herbs, and exotic spices were tightly packed, creating a personal, movable cloud of fragrance that protected the wearer from the harsh realities of the medieval environment. To understand the beauty and necessity of the pomander, one must understand how people of the Middle Ages viewed the air they breathed. Medical science of the era was dominated by the miasma theory, the belief that diseases, plagues, and moral corruption were carried through the atmosphere by foul, stagnant odours. The common streets of medieval towns, filled with the waste of tanneries, horses, and open drains, were seen as breeding grounds for deadly vapours. Therefore, a beautiful scent was not just a matter of personal vanity, it was a physical shield against death itself. To smell sweet was to be healthy, pure, and spiritually aligned with the protective forces of heaven. The pomander was worn as a prominent piece of jewellery, suspended from a heavy gold chain around the waist of a lady or worn around the neck of a wealthy lord. As they walked through crowded spaces or stood in the damp, draughty halls of their castles, they would periodically lift the metallic sphere to their nose, inhaling the rich, concentrated aromas of ambergris, musk, civet, and cinnamon. These ingredients were incredibly rare and astronomically expensive, imported along perilous routes from Africa and Asia. Consequently, the act of lifting a pomander to one's face became a highly stylized, performative gesture of exclusivity. It told anyone watching that the wearer possessed the financial power to breathe an entirely different, purified air than the rest of humanity. The craftsmanship of these objects allowed the elite to display their refined taste and religious piety simultaneously. The exterior of a silver pomander was often engraved with delicate Gothic arches, scenes of courtly love, or protective biblical inscriptions meant to ward off evil spirits and sudden illnesses. Some pomanders were designed in the shape of miniature skulls or hourglasses, serving as a silent memento mori, a gentle poetic reminder of the transience of earthly life, even as the wearer indulged in the finest sensory luxuries. This duality was central to the medieval experience, surrounding oneself with ultimate physical beauty while remaining deeply, continuously aware of the fragile boundary between existence and eternity. This preoccupation with internal and external purity meant that the spaces inhabited by the nobility were also subject to strict aesthetic management. Servants routinely covered the stone floors of great halls and bedchambers with fresh rushes mixed with dried lavender, sweet flag, and crushed mint. Every time a foot stepped onto the floor, the plants were crushed, releasing a clean green aroma that fought against the damp smell of stone and wood smoke. The home, much like the human body, was treated as a managed fortress against the chaotic, unhygienic chaos of the outside world, where beauty was defined by the systematic exclusion of nature's less pleasant truths. As you lie wrapped in the secure, peaceful darkness of your room, listening to the gentle, rhythmic crackle of the wood fire, imagine the weight of a gold pomander in your hand. Feel the intricate engravings on its surface, and imagine the heavy, sweet scent of ancient spices filling the cool night air. It was a world where a simple breath was an act of calculated defense, and where the line between elegance and survival was woven into the very jewelry that hung from an aristocrat's waist. A world that worked tirelessly to transform the raw anxiety of mortality into a display of timeless grace and majestic authority. As the seasons of a human life progressed within the stone walls of medieval estates, the relentless passage of time brought a final, profound challenge to the strict standards of physical appearance. In a world devoid of modern skincare science or restorative medicine, the signs of aging appeared early and left deep, indelible marks upon the skin. Yet the medieval philosophy of identity did not view the onset of maturity with the same existential dread that modern cultures often do. Instead, as a person transitioned from the vibrant flush of youth into the twilight of their years, the cultural expectations of beauty underwent a natural, dignified transformation, shifting from physical allure to the grand symbols of wisdom, authority, and spiritual readiness. For a noblewoman who had spent her youth plucking her hairline, painting her face with ceruse, and bound in tight, high-waisted gowns, the arrival of grey hair and wrinkles signalled a dramatic shift in her public persona. She was no longer expected to embody the fragile, untouchable ideal of courtly love celebrated by travelling troubadours. Instead, she stepped into the highly respected role of the family matriarch. Her clothing became looser, more structural, and darker in colour, shifting from brilliant scarlet and gold silks to deep purples, heavy blacks, and unblemished whites. She adopted the wimple, a crisp white linen fabric that wrapped securely around her neck and chin, framing her face in a manner that mirrored the quiet, holy devotion of a cloistered nun. This structural framing of the older woman's face served a dual purpose. While it modestly concealed the natural sagging of the jawline and the deep lines of the neck, it simultaneously elevated her social standing. In the eyes of medieval society, an elder lady dressed in immaculate, starch-white wimples and heavy dark wools was a figure of immense moral authority. She was the keeper of family lineages, the coordinator of strategic marriages, and the manager of vast domestic estates while the men were away on royal campaigns. Her beauty was no longer measured by the smooth texture of her skin, but by the serene, disciplined gravity of her presence, projecting an image of an earthly soul that was gradually untangling itself from the vanities of the world to prepare for the eternal. For noblemen, the aging process allowed them to cultivate an entirely new, imposing dimension of masculine majesty. While the young knights competed in tournaments with curled blonde hair and tightly tailored hose that emphasized physical agility, the elder lords allowed their beards to grow long, thick, and untamed by the fleeting fashions of the younger generation. A long white or silver beard was treated as a majestic crown of wisdom, an undeniable physical proof that the man had survived decades of political intrigue, regional famines, and the brutal physical tolls of medieval life. It signalled that he was a senior counsellor to the king, a man whose words carried the heavy weight of lived history. This cultural reverence for mature beauty was deeply rooted in the medieval belief that a long life was a direct sign of divine favour. In an era where infant mortality was high and simple infections could end a life in a matter of days, reaching an advanced age was a rare, monumental achievement. The deep lines etched into an elder lord's brow or the silver strands in a matriarch's hair were not seen as flaws to be hidden, but as badges of honour, proving that they possessed a strong constitution, a disciplined mind, and the protective grace of God. Their bodies became living histories, monuments of endurance that commanded immediate, unspoken respect from the younger generations who still had to prove their worth in the volatile landscape of the court. As you rest in the calm, restorative stillness of your room, watching the firelight soften into a deep, meditative glow, reflect on this ancient approach to the evening of life. Imagine a world where the marks of time were not treated as enemies to be fought with illusions, but as steps leading toward a higher, more sacred form of human dignity. It was a world that recognized that every stage of existence possessed its own unique, carefully sculpted beauty, turning the natural process of maturation into a grand historical ascension that prepared the individual to leave an enduring legacy in the memories of those who followed. To paint a complete and honest picture of the medieval world, we must step away from the high, draughty chambers of the stone castles and journey down into the valleys, where the vast majority of humanity lived and laboured. While the nobility spent fortunes to sculpt themselves into pale, untouchable icons, the common folk, the peasants, blacksmiths, weavers, and farmers, possessed their own unique, vibrant understanding of appearance and beauty. For them, beauty was not an expensive chemical experiment or a rigid political strategy. It was something deeply raw, practical, and intimately tied to the turning of the seasons and the rhythm of the earth. In the fields and small villages of medieval Europe, the standards of physical attractiveness were directly connected to vitality, endurance, and strength. A beautiful peasant woman was celebrated not for a ghostly, sickly paleness, but for the bright, healthy flush of her cheeks and the robust, sturdy build of her form. Her body had to endure the heavy demands of rural life, carrying water from distant streams, tending to large gardens, and helping with the arduous autumn harvests. Thinness or fragility, so prized in the royal courts, was looked upon with worry in a village, as it often signalled illness, hunger, or an inability to withstand the harsh winters that tested every household. The sun-kissed, tanned skin that the aristocracy despised was worn by the common people as an inevitable badge of their connection to nature. While they could not afford imported ceruse or expensive alabaster powders, peasant women used the abundance of the meadows to care for their skin. They washed their faces in the fresh morning dew of early spring, believing it possessed mystical properties that could clear the complexion and grant a natural, long-lasting radiance. They used simple infusions of wild chamomile and elderflower to soothe sunburnt skin after long hours in the fields, embracing a natural approach to grooming that was entirely free from the toxic poisons used by the elite. Hair, too, was managed with practical grace. Peasant women rarely had the leisure time to spend hours plucking their hairlines or engineering towering headdresses. Instead, they grew their hair long and bound it tightly into practical braids and plaited crowns, securing it away from their faces with simple bands of locally woven linen or hemp. During seasonal festivals such as May Day or the midsummer solstice, young village girls would untie their hair, weaving crowns of wild cornflowers, daisies and wheat stalks into their locks. In these moments of collective celebration, beauty was an expression of joy and abundance, a temporary release from the heavy burdens of feudal obligation. For the men of the working class, masculine attractiveness was defined by the visible results of honest, physical labour. Broad shoulders shaped by swinging the blacksmith's hammer, strong legs built from walking behind a horse-drawn plough, and hands hardened by woodcutting were viewed with immense respect by their peers. Their appearance spoke of an ability to protect, provide, and endure. While the nobility wore tightly tailored silks that restricted movement, the common man wore loose, durable tunics of homespun wool and linen, tied at the waist with a simple leather cord, a wardrobe designed for utility, breathability, and freedom of movement. As you rest in the deepening stillness of the night, listening to the soft, comforting sighs of the fireplace, consider this profound duality of the past. A world divided into two distinct aesthetic universes, one of fragile engineered luxury hidden away behind stone walls, and one of rugged, natural resilience lived out under the open sky. The history of human beauty is a story of these two contrasting truths, each trying in its own way to find meaning, dignity, and a sense of pride in a world that was always shifting beneath their feet. To truly appreciate the visual genius of medieval beauty standards, we must observe how these features interacted with the unique sensory landscape of the medieval night. In an era long before the invention of electricity, the world after sunset was plunged into a deep, uncompromising darkness. The only forces capable of fighting back this nightly shadows were natural fire, burning torches, oil lamps, and beeswax candles. This meant that the appearance of the elite was never designed to be viewed under the harsh, revealing glare of bright day. Rather, it was precisely calculated to achieve its maximum hypnotic effect within the soft, dancing glow of the fireplace. When a noble assembly gathered in the great hall for a nightly banquet, the atmosphere was a complex theatre of shadow and light. Under the warm, golden flicker of dozens of candles, the extreme paleness of a lady's skin, which might have looked ghostly or unhealthy in the bright afternoon sun, was transformed into a radiant, ethereal glow. The harsh white lead ceruse foundation acted as a smooth canvas that caught and reflected the candlelight, making the wearer appear almost translucent, like a living ivory statue moving gracefully through the dim room. The deep crimson of the lips and the dilated belladonna-treated pupils became intensely vivid, capturing the firelight and drawing the gaze of everyone in the room. This deliberate manipulation of contrast was a necessity born of the architectural realities of the time. Castle halls were cavernous spaces with high timber ceilings that swallowed light, leaving the corners of the rooms in permanent shadow. In this environment, subtle features and natural skin tones would simply fade into the darkness. Therefore, the nobility had to over-exaggerate their features, using bold visual choices, the completely bare, expansive forehead, the heavily contrasted red and white pigments, and the shimmering metallic embroidery of their garments to ensure their presence remained commandingly visible even from the far end of a smoke-filled room. The fabrics chosen for evening wear were also selected for their relationship with firelight. Stiff silks and heavy brocades woven with actual gold and silver threads did not just sit passively on the body, they reacted to every movement, sending sudden flashes of light cutting through the dimness as the wearer turned or bowed. The deep, rich velvets absorbed the shadows, creating a visual weight that made the aristocratic silhouette appear incredibly solid and imposing against the fragile, flickering background. The elite understood that they were creating a living illusion, a dreamlike spectacle that separated them entirely from the common reality of the outside world. As you listen to the steady, comforting crackle of the wood fire in your own room, letting the warmth wash over your thoughts, imagine standing in that ancient hall. Watch how the long shadows dance across the stone walls, mimicking the movements of the heavily robed figures below. It was a world where beauty was inextricably linked to the mystery of the night, where the limitations of light were turned into an artistic advantage. Every plucked hair, every drop of perfume, and every shimmering gemstone was part of a grand design to conquer the darkness, transforming the fragile human form into an enduring monument of majesty that hovered gracefully between the earthly realm and the divine. To fully grasp the experience of medieval beauty, we must ask ourselves a fundamental question: how did the people of that era actually see themselves? The way a society observes its own reflection directly shapes its understanding of identity, and in the Middle Ages the mirror was an object of immense luxury, mystery, and deep philosophical speculation. Unlike the flat, flawless glass mirrors that line our modern homes, providing a crisp and literal duplicate of reality, medieval mirrors were rare, small, and imperfect instruments that transformed the act of self-reflection into a deeply contemplative, almost magical ritual. In the early and high medieval periods, most mirrors were made not of glass, but of meticulously polished metals such as bronze, iron, or solid silver. A noble lady or a powerful lord would hold a small hand-sized disc of silver, turning it slowly against the flickering light of a candle to catch their image. Because these metal surfaces were prone to tarnishing and scratching, the reflection they provided was soft, hazy, and imbued with a warm, metallic tint. You did not see every individual pore or minor blemish on your skin. Instead, you saw a stylized, generalized version of yourself, a portrait painted in silver and shadow. This technological limitation encouraged an aesthetic mindset where beauty was viewed in broad, harmonious strokes rather than a perfection of tiny details. By the 13th and 14th centuries, early glassmaking guilds in Venice and Germany began to craft convex glass mirrors. These were made by blowing a sphere of hot glass, injecting a mixture of molten lead or tin into the center, and then cutting the cooled sphere into small curved discs. Because these mirrors were convex, they created a noticeably distorted fisheye reflection. When an aristocrat looked into a glass mirror, their features were slightly compressed, making the center of the face appear prominent while the edges curved away into the frame. This distortion subtly reinforced the cultural obsession with the central features of expression, the eyes and the high expansive forehead, while blurring the outer boundaries of the skull, aligning the physical reflection with the artistic ideals found in the illuminated manuscripts of the time. The scarcity and cost of these objects turned the mirror into a potent status symbol. They were often encased in beautiful ornate frames, crafted from carved ivory, mother of pearl or gold, decorated with scenes of chivalric romance, charging knights or mythical unicorns. To own a fine mirror was to possess a powerful token of courtly love, frequently given as a betrothal gift from a young lord to his future bride. When a lady carried her ivory-cased mirror attached to her girdle, she was announcing to the court that she had the wealth to purchase a piece of captured light, a private luxury that allowed her to monitor and maintain her public persona with absolute precision. Yet the mirror also carried a heavy weight of moral warning. The Church looked upon the mirror with intense anxiety, frequently portraying it in sermons and woodcuts as the primary tool of vanity, a deadly sin that lured souls away from the contemplation of the eternal. Preachers warned that a person who spent too much time staring at their physical reflection was falling into a demonic trap, falling in love with a temporary vessel of clay that would eventually decay in the earth. This created a profound psychological tension for the medieval elite. The mirror was both an essential instrument for sculpting the noble image required by politics and a dangerous spiritual precipice that threatened the safety of the immortal soul. As you rest in the quiet protection of the night, listening to the gentle rhythmic crackle of the wood fire, imagine holding one of those ancient heavy discs of polished silver. Picture the hazy golden reflection looking back at you through the dim candlelight. It was a world where seeing oneself was never a casual, thoughtless act, but a moment of intense awareness, a window into a reality where the boundary between the physical image and the spiritual soul was beautifully, mysteriously blurred. As we linger in the soft, flickering light of the medieval evening, we must re-examine another deep-seated myth of the past, the idea that the knights and warriors who dominated the battlefields of Europe were nothing more than rough, unkempt men with little regard for the styling of their hair. In truth, within the strict codes of chivalry and courtly behaviour, a nobleman's hair was treated with an almost religious reverence. It was a primary physical indicator of his freedom, his lineage, and his unyielding loyalty to the crown. To neglect one's hair was to signal a mind that had surrendered to chaos, while a meticulously styled head of hair was the ultimate mark of a disciplined warrior gentleman. Throughout the high medieval period, long flowing locks remained the definitive symbol of a free man and a ruling aristocrat. In stark contrast, criminals, serfs, and those who had lost their honour were systematically shorn, their heads shaved rough and close as a public mark of their low status and submission. Therefore a knight took immense pride in the length and volume of his hair. Young squires and pages training in the great castles spent significant portions of their mornings combing through their hair with heavy combs carved from boxwood, staghorn, or fine ivory. They washed their hair with warm waters infused with dried nettle, chamomile, and lye soap, ensuring it maintained a clean, healthy lustre that would catch the sunlight during royal tournaments. To achieve the highly coveted, perfectly uniform curls praised in the romantic poems of the era, noblemen relied on specialized techniques that required patience and dedication. Barbers and personal servants used cylindrical iron rods that were heated carefully over the embers of the hearth. They would wrap sections of the nobleman's hair around these hot irons, sealing the shape with fragrant ointments made from almond oil, rosewax, or refined bear grease, which was highly prized for its ability to provide a strong, weather-resistant hold and a brilliant, deep shine. The result was a cascading mane of sculpted curls that framed the face, creating a striking image of controlled power and aesthetic refinement. This dedication to hairstyling created a fascinating practical challenge when it came to the realities of warfare. A knight could not simply ride into conflict with loose flowing curls that could blind his vision or become tangled in the heavy iron rings of his chainmail coif. Before donning his padded arming cap and heavy steel helmet, a warrior would carefully braid his hair, flattening the plaits securely against his skull or bind it with tight silk bands. When the battle or the tournament concluded and the heavy helmet was lifted away in the presence of the king and the ladies of the court, the act of shaking loose his long, shimmering curls was a deeply dramatic performative moment, demonstrating that his refined nobility had remained unbroken by the brutal pressures of conflict. The beard and moustache were subject to the same rigorous standards of management, while the preference for being clean-shaven or heavily bearded shifted from generation to generation depending on the whims of the reigning monarch. Any facial hair had to be kept immaculately trimmed. A wild, unmanaged beard was looked upon with horror in the royal court, associated with the lawless bandits who lived in the deep, untamed forests, or with those suffering from madness. Barbers used sharp steel razors and soothing compresses made from bay laurel and elderberry wine to keep the skin around the beard smooth and unblemished, ensuring that even the most battle-hardened lord maintained the flawless visual harmony demanded by courtly society. As you rest in the deep, undisturbed peace of your room, listening to the rhythmic, comforting sigh of the dying fire, picture this ancient devotion to form. Imagine a world where a man's curls were as much a part of his armour as his steel shield, and where the care of his hair was a daily declaration of his right to rule. It was a world that refused to separate the brutal realities of power from the delicate pursuit of grace, ensuring that every detail of the human presentation, even beneath the heavy weight of an iron helmet, remained a radiant testament to an era obsessed with order, honor, and timeless majesty. As the heavy wooden shutters of the castle chambers were closed against the damp night air, and the grand halls fell into a deep, velvety silence, the pursuit of aesthetic harmony shifted from the public theatre of the court to the highly private sanctuary of the bedchamber. In the medieval mind, sleep was not merely a functional pause in the day, it was a profound, spiritually vulnerable state where the human soul slipped away from the conscious control of the body. To ensure that this nightly transition was peaceful, healthy, and protected from evil influences, the aristocracy applied their strict standards of beauty, scent, and order to the very environment in which they rested, transforming the bedchamber into a managed haven of sensory tranquility. The central focus of this nightly ritual was the management of scent within the sleeping quarters, because the medieval world lacked modern climate control. Stone bedrooms could easily become damp, holding the lingering smell of wood smoke and cold masonry. To combat this, noble families relied on the ancient art of strewing herbs and burning aromatic resins before retiring for the night. Servants would light small brass or silver censers, filling the air with the gentle, deeply calming smoke of frankincense, myrrh, or dried rose petals. This heavy, sweet fragrance hung in the air, creating an invisible boundary that was believed to purify the breath of the sleepers and ward off the terrifying nightmares thought to be delivered by wandering demons. The bed itself, often a massive structural monument crafted from carved oak or walnut, was prepared with immense care. Beneath the heavy velvet curtains that were drawn tight to trap warmth and block out draughts, the mattresses stuffed with soft swan down or fine sheep's wool were infused with specific botanical elements designed to induce a deep, restorative rest. Ladies and their maids would place small linen sachets filled with dried lavender, wild marjoram, and crushed hops directly beneath the pillows. The gentle warmth of the sleeper's head would activate these herbs throughout the night, releasing a steady, natural aroma that lowered the pulse, quieted a racing mind, and wrapped the conscious thoughts in a protective cloak of green, earthy peace. This preoccupation with a beautiful sleeping environment extended to the garments worn to bed, or rather the deliberate lack thereof. While modern imagery often depicts medieval people sleeping in heavy robes, the elite of this era almost universally slept completely naked, viewing the night as a time of absolute physical liberation from the tight, restrictive doublets, corsets, and heavy wools worn during the day. Before slipping between the fine linen sheets, which were washed with lye soap and rinsed in waters scented with wild thyme, noblemen and ladies would rub their skin with soothing oils made from pressed almonds and infused with violet roots. This practice kept the skin soft and heavily perfumed, ensuring that even in the complete isolation of sleep, the physical form remained an elegant, refined vessel. The visual landscape of the bedchamber was also carefully managed to soothe the eyes before the candles were extinguished. The walls were frequently hung with rich tapestries depicting peaceful green forests, quiet hunting scenes, or allegories of courtly love, providing a final, harmonious image for the aristocrat to contemplate as their eyelids grew heavy. The flickering light of the dying hearth fire played across these woven stories, making the trees and figures appear to sway gently in a silent, comforting dance. Every element of the room worked in perfect unison to banish the chaotic, violent realities of the outer medieval world, creating a localized paradise where the mind could safely surrender to the dark. As you rest within the deep, unbothered calm of your own evening, listening to the soft, rhythmic sighing of the wood fire, let your thoughts drift through those quiet, curtained chambers of the past. Imagine the heavy scent of lavender and rose smoke settling over the room, and feel the absolute security of a space designed purely for rest. It was a world that recognized that to truly possess beauty and grace in the light of day, one had to nurture and protect the soul in the absolute stillness of the night, turning the simple act of falling asleep into a sacred, timeless art of survival and peace. As we expand our understanding of how the medieval elite maintained their physical perfection and deep mental calm, we must travel beyond the stone walls of the castle chambers to the natural wonders of the European landscape, the ancient thermal springs and mineral baths. Across England, Germany and France, locations such as the Roman-founded city of Bath or the steaming springs of Baden-Baden were not merely medical retreats, they were the ultimate centres of medieval spa culture and elite socialisation. In these sanctuaries of warmth, the ruling classes found a rare opportunity to escape the rigid constraints of court protocol, using the healing, mineral-rich waters of the earth to completely rejuvenate their skin, soothe their bodies, and restore a sense of internal peace. To the medieval mind, natural hot springs were viewed as miraculous gifts from the Creator, places where the subterranean fires of the earth infused the water with divine therapeutic properties. Aristocrats would travel for weeks in heavy oak carriages to reach these thermal sanctuaries, seeking relief from the physical tolls of wearing heavy iron armour, riding horses across rough terrains, and enduring the damp chill of northern European winters. Upon arrival, the process of bathing was treated as an elaborate multi-day ritual. Noblemen and ladies would step into large stone-lined communal pools filled with steaming, sulphurous water, letting the natural heat open their pores and draw out the deep-seated tensions of political life. Within these thermal havens, the care of the skin reached a level of natural luxury that rivaled the finest cosmetic treatments of the courts. After spending hours soaking in the mineral waters, bathers would be attended to by specialized servants who applied gentle body scrubs made from fine sea salt, crushed almond pastes, and wild honey. This process exfoliated the skin, removing the dead cells and leaving the entire body looking smooth, glowing, and incredibly soft to the touch. Following the scrub, the skin was deeply massaged with aromatic oils distilled from pine needles, rosemary and juniper berries, which stimulated the circulation and imparted a fresh, clean forest aroma that symbolized absolute physical purification. The social atmosphere of these medieval bathhouses was surprisingly vibrant and relaxed, in an era where clothing was the ultimate indicator of rank. Stepping into the water meant stripping away the heavy silks, velvets and gold chains that defined one's social identity. Wrapped only in simple fine linen sheets or thin bathing tunics, dukes, counts and high-ranking clerics sat together in the steam, engaging in informal political negotiations, reciting newly composed poetry, and enjoying light banquets served on floating wooden trays. The bathhouse became an alternative court, a space where beauty was defined not by the artificial engineering of garments, but by the raw, natural health and relaxed grace of the human form. This devotion to thermal bathing also possessed a profound spiritual dimension. The Church, while occasionally cautious about the mixed-gender nature of some public bathhouses, generally supported the use of thermal springs for health, viewing the cleansing of the physical vessel as a natural companion to the purification of the soul. To emerge from the steaming waters with clean, glowing skin and a tranquil mind was seen as a temporal rebirth, a way to wash away the invisible grit and moral exhaustion accumulated during months of earthly governance. It was a beautiful, harmonious marriage of medicine, luxury and faith, where the earth itself provided the tools necessary to preserve the youth and vitality of the ruling elite. As you sink deeper into the quiet, undisturbed comfort of your own evening, listening to the gentle, rhythmic crackle of the wood fire, imagine the soothing sensation of those ancient steaming springs. Picture the thick clouds of warm vapour rising into the cool air, carrying the scent of pine and rosemary. It was a world that knew how to look to nature for healing, finding in the hidden depths of the earth a sanctuary of ultimate rest and physical restoration, a place where the heavy burdens of power could be temporarily washed away, leaving the body and the mind completely aligned in a state of timeless, serene perfection. While the face and the hair served as the primary canvas for public display, there was another, more subtle feature that medieval society scrutinized with intense interest: the hands. In the high courts of Europe, the appearance of a person's hands was treated as a definitive, unfeigned proof of their social destiny. Unlike the face, which could be painted, or the body, which could be reshaped by structural garments, the hands spoke an honest language of life experience. A beautiful hand was expected to be smooth, white, and completely devoid of any marks of physical labour, serving as a silent, continuous declaration that the owner belonged to a lineage born purely to rule, to pray, and to indulge in the fine arts of chivalry. For an aristocratic lady, the ideal hands were invariably described in courtly literature as long, slender, and remarkably pale, with fingers that tapered gracefully like fine ivory needles. To maintain this delicate appearance, women went to great lengths to shield their hands from the altering effects of nature and daily life. Whenever they stepped outside the private solar chambers into the castle courtyards, or went out to participate in the noble sport of falconry, they wore soft, closely fitted gloves crafted from the finest kidskin or treated deerskin. These gloves, often scented with rosewater or ambergris, protected the skin from the darkening rays of the sun and the drying effects of the wind, ensuring that the hands remained as pale and smooth as alabaster. The care of the fingernails was an equally precise and disciplined ritual. Long, unkempt nails were looked upon with absolute revulsion, associated with the wild beasts of the forest or with the lawless outcasts who lived on the margins of society. Instead, the nails of the nobility were kept neatly trimmed, rounded, and clean. Royal manicurists and personal maids used small, specialized silver files and delicate shears to shape the nails, after which they would rub them thoroughly with fine oils extracted from sweet almonds or compound pastes made from white beeswax. This meticulous polishing gave the nails a healthy, translucent, and naturally rosy luster that gleamed softly under the warm glow of the evening candles. For the men of the nobility, the knights and lords who spent their days training with heavy iron swords, lances, and wooden shields, maintaining the aristocratic ideal of the hand was a fascinating paradox. The violent demands of warfare naturally threatened to create rough skin and thick calluses on the palms. To counteract this, noblemen relied on rich, healing ointments applied generously before they retired for the night. Servants would rub their masters' hands with dense salves made from rendered stag fat, honey, and infusions of marshmallow root, which possessed powerful skin-softening properties. A knight's hand had to be capable of crushing an enemy's armour in battle, yet remain soft, smooth, and elegant when offering a gentle touch to a lady during a courtly dance. This obsession with the hands extended into the realm of formal manners and dining etiquette. Because medieval banquets were largely eaten using the fingers, with knives and spoons shared among guests, the cleanliness and presentation of the hands before a meal was a highly ritualized public affair. Before sitting down at the grand tables, servants would circulate through the hall, carrying large silver basins filled with warm water, scented with rose petals, sage, or orange blossoms. Each noble guest would publicly wash their hands, letting the fragrant water cleanse their fingers before drying them on immaculate linen towels. The act of washing was a performance of hygiene, wealth, and mutual respect, reassuring everyone present that the hands sharing the platters were pure, refined, and worthy of the high society they inhabited. As you lie restfully in the deep, protective calm of your own room, watching the soft golden light of the fire play across the ceiling, imagine the cool touch of a silver water basin on a dark medieval night. Think of the immense discipline required to shape every single detail of the body into a monument of status and grace. It was a world where even the tips of the fingers were conscripted into the service of power, turning a simple gesture or a quiet touch into a profound statement of nobility, elegance, and timeless authority that commanded the respect of an entire kingdom. As we continue to dismantle the dark, unrefined myths of the past, we must turn our attention to a feature that defined the very essence of human warmth and expression within the royal courts: the medieval smile, and the unexpected discipline of dental care. A widespread misconception suggests that the people of the Middle Ages lived with complete disregard for oral hygiene, suffering from universal decay and blackened teeth. In reality, within the highly aestheticized world of the aristocracy, a clean white smile and sweet, fresh breath were considered absolutely essential components of physical beauty, moral purity, and courtly sophistication. To understand the medieval approach to dental care, one must look at the diet of the ruling class, long before the massive influx of refined plantation sugar from the New World. The primary sweetener in Europe was honey, which was consumed in moderation. This lack of daily concentrated sugar meant that the structural integrity of medieval teeth was naturally sturdier than in later centuries. However, the elite did not merely rely on luck to maintain their smiles. They viewed the mouth as a delicate portal that required constant systematic purification, connecting the freshness of a person's breath directly to the cleanliness of their soul and their fitness for high society. Every morning as a noble lord or lady rose from their curtained beds, the ritual of oral cleansing began. Instead of modern brushes, they used small squares of rough linen cloth, or frayed twigs from hazel or willow trees, which possessed natural astringent properties. They would dip these tools into specialized tooth powders mixed by court physicians or wise women. These powders were crafted from highly abrasive whitening ingredients such as the ashes of burnt rosemary stalks, crushed marble dust, pulverized cuttlefish bone, and dried sage leaves. By vigorously rubbing this mixture across their teeth, the nobility managed to scrape away surface stains and plaque, maintaining a remarkably bright, polished appearance that caught the light when they spoke or laughed. The management of breath was treated with equal seriousness, particularly in an environment where courtly love and intimate conversations in crowded great halls were the currency of political influence. To ensure their breath was as sweet as the spring air, aristocrats would chew on whole cloves, cardamom pods, or aniseeds throughout the day, releasing powerful aromatic oils that masked any internal imbalances. They also rinsed their mouths with warm distillations of red wine infused with mint, bay leaves, and cinnamon. A person who suffered from foul breath was looked upon with deep pity and social distress, often avoided in the close-quarters dances of the evening, as a sour odour was believed to indicate a decaying interior or a spirit burdened by hidden corruption. When a tooth did become diseased or painful, the solutions were admittedly brutal, often requiring extraction by specialized barbers or traveling surgeons. Because losing a tooth altered the symmetry of the face, an unforgivable flaw in a culture obsessed with structural perfection, wealthy individuals sought primitive forms of restorative dentistry. Early medical texts record instances where loose teeth were bound together and stabilized using fine gold or silver wire, ensuring the rows remained straight and visually harmonious. In some rare cases, fragments of smooth white bone or ivory were shaped to mimic missing teeth, pinned carefully into the gap to preserve the continuous unbroken line of the aristocrat's smile during public ceremonies. As you lie in the quiet restorative sanctuary of your own evening, watching the final, sleepy embers of the wood fire glow a deep, comforting orange, reflect on this intimate aspect of the past. Imagine a world where a smile was a carefully guarded treasure, polished with the ashes of wild herbs and sweetened with exotic spices from distant lands. It was a world that understood that true grace was found not just in the grand architecture of castles or the heavy weight of silk robes, but in the small, immaculate details of human expression, a timeless reminder that the desire to present oneself with dignity, purity, and radiant warmth is as ancient as humanity itself. If the smile was the portal of human warmth in the medieval court, the eyes were considered the windows directly illuminating the movements of the immortal soul. In the courtly literature and poetry of the High Middle Ages, a person's eyes were described as potent instruments of spiritual and physical capture, capable of casting a silent, inescapable spell over anyone who dared to look too deeply into them. To possess beautiful eyes was to hold a position of profound emotional and social leverage. Consequently, the aristocracy developed a highly specialized secretive tradition of ocular care and enhancement, utilizing the potent properties of dangerous plants and botanical distillations to grant their gaze an unnatural hypnotic intensity. The definitive ideal for medieval eyes, particularly for noblewomen, was a wide, luminous, and liquid clarity that suggested deep intelligence, emotional purity, and an almost angelic serenity. To achieve this brilliant, clear appearance in an age where draughty castle halls were constantly filled with stinging wood smoke from massive hearths, ladies relied on daily soothing washes. Their personal attendants distilled fresh waters from chamomile flowers, fennel roots, and a specialized herb known as eyebright. These cooling drops were gently applied to the eyes each morning, washing away the redness, irritation, and fatigue of the night, leaving the sclera, the whites of the eyes, appearing bright, clear, and starkly contrasted against the coloured iris. However, as the Renaissance began to whisper its early influences through the trading republics of Italy and Spain, the pursuit of optical allure took a dramatically dangerous turn. Noblewomen became obsessed with creating an intense, dark, and deep gaze that could hold the firelight of the evening banquets. To achieve this, they turned to the extracts of the deadly nightshade plant, known scientifically and poetically as belladonna, meaning beautiful lady. Women would drop minute amounts of this highly toxic botanical juice directly onto their eyeballs. The active compounds in the belladonna forced the pupils to dilate completely, transforming the eyes into large, dark, and shimmering orbs that seemed to drink in the dim light of the room, creating an illusion of intense emotional depth and seductive mystery. The use of belladonna was a perilous gamble with one's own physical survival. While it granted the lady a temporary fashionable gaze that left poets writing sonnets about her mesmerizing beauty, repeated use of the toxic drops caused severe blurred vision, an extreme sensitivity to light, and eventually permanent blindness. Yet such was the staggering power of the visual hierarchy within the court that many women willingly sacrificed their long-term health to maintain that fleeting, dangerous brilliance. They moved through the dim corridors of their palaces half-blind, guided by the arms of their maids, presenting to the world a face of absolute unbothered composure while their dilated eyes captured every stray flicker of candlelight, turning them into radiant semi-divine enigmas. For the men, the eyes were expected to project a completely different dimension of power, one of fierce, unwavering focus and stoic discipline. A knight's gaze had to remain steady and piercing, flashing with the cold light of authority during council meetings and battle campaigns. To preserve this sharp sight, male nobles used invigorating washes made from rosemary waters and rose vinegar, believed to strengthen the optical nerves and keep the vision keen for tracking prey during hunts or navigating the chaotic landscape of a tournament. Red or watery eyes in a man were looked upon as a sign of weakness, drunkenness, or physical decay, a failure to master the internal humours of the body. As you rest in the deepening, velvety silence of your own room tonight, watching the soft, rhythmic dancing of the firelight against the walls, contemplate the intense devotion behind those ancient gazes. Imagine a lady stepping into a grand hall, her vision blurred by the magic of belladonna, seeing the world only as a beautiful, glowing haze of gold and shadow, yet projecting an image of absolute hypnotic dominance to all who looked upon her. It was a world that understood that the eyes held a silent, sovereign power, and that to capture the gaze of an entire kingdom, one had to be willing to walk on the very edge of darkness itself to maintain a radiant, unforgettable light. As we complete our journey down the physical form of the medieval aristocrat, we reach the very foundation of their stance and movement, the feet, and the highly stylized world of noble footwear. In the late medieval period, particularly within the flamboyant courts of England, France, and Burgundy, the feet were not merely functional tools hidden away under long robes. Instead, they became one of the most exaggerated theatrical spaces for displaying immense wealth, political immunity from labour, and a highly refined mastery over the natural shape of the human body. To have a beautiful step was to announce that your path through life was entirely elevated above the harsh, muddy realities of the common world. The ultimate expression of this lower silhouette was the invention of the poulain, also known as the Krakow, a soft leather or velvet shoe with an incredibly long, exaggeratedly pointed toe that extended far beyond the natural foot. These pointed tips could stretch anywhere from 6 inches to over 2 feet for the highest-ranking princes. To prevent the long tips from flopping awkwardly as the lord walked, they were stuffed with dried moss, wool, or soft whalebone structures, sometimes even chained directly to the wearer's knees with delicate silver links. Walking in poulains required an entirely unnatural gliding gait, a slow and rhythmic lifting of the leg that made it physically impossible to run, labour or walk through muddy public streets, serving as an absolute visual proof of a life of pure luxury and leisure. However, to fit into these narrow, tightly tailored architectural shoes required a continuous disciplined routine of foot care and personal pedicuring that remained hidden beneath the surface of courtly life. Because the tight leather points compressed the toes together, noblemen and ladies suffered from severe pressure marks and aching muscles. To restore vitality to their feet after a long day of standing during royal ceremonies, they relied on complex therapeutic foot baths. Servants would prepare deep wooden tubs filled with hot water infused with dried sage, oak bark, and crushed bay leaves. The natural tannins in the oak bark tightened and strengthened the skin, while the aromatic herbs reduced swelling and neutralized any odors, keeping the feet pristine and clean. The care of the toenails was treated with the same meticulous precision as the hands. Long or untrimmed nails inside such narrow, constricting shoes would cause immense pain and lead to severe infections which in the medieval era could easily threaten a person's life. Personal valets and maids used specialized curved iron blades to trim the nails short and straight, followed by a thorough rubbing with thick pomades made from animal fats, pulverized mint, and rose wax. This routine ensured that when an aristocrat removed their extravagant shoes in the privacy of their bedchambers, their feet remained soft, white, and completely free from the rough, calloused textures associated with the barefoot or clog-wearing peasant class. For noblewomen, whose feet were usually concealed beneath the heavy cascading folds of their voluminous kirtles and gowns, the brief glimpse of a small, elegantly pointed shoe peeking out from under a silk hem was considered a moment of intense aesthetic and romantic allure. Literature of the era frequently praised the lady whose feet moved like little mice beneath her skirts, implying a weightless, silent grace that seemed to defy the heavy laws of gravity. To maintain this illusion of miniature daintiness, some women bound their feet lightly in linen bands before slipping into their evening slippers, prioritizing the narrow, streamlined geometry demanded by fashion over their own physical comfort. As you rest in the deep, undisturbed quiet of your own space tonight, listening to the final sleepy sighs of the wood fire, imagine the slow, theatrical procession of those pointed silhouettes across the candlelit stones of a grand hall. See how every step was a calculated performance of status, a deliberate choice to trade convenience for a magnificent, unforgettable elegance. It was a world that refused to leave any part of the human body untamed by art, transforming even the dark, hidden ground beneath their feet into a radiant testament to an era completely enchanted by order, prestige, and timeless majesty. As the late medieval period blended into the early dawn of the Renaissance, the aristocratic obsession with preserving the flawless moon-white clarity of the skin gave rise to one of the most enigmatic and striking accessories in the history of human fashion, the travelling mask, known in various courts as the vizard. For a noblewoman of high standing stepping outside the protective shadow of her stone castle to travel between seasonal estates or attend outdoor royal hunts was an endeavour fraught with aesthetic peril. The open air, the harsh glare of the midday sun, and the swirling dust of unpaved country roads were constant threats to her carefully cultivated alabaster complexion. To combat these natural enemies, the elite transformed the act of self-defense into an unsettling, mesmerizing display of silent majesty. The vizard was an oval-shaped mask crafted from stiffened leather, covered on the exterior with rich, midnight black velvet and lined on the inside with smooth silk to prevent friction against the skin. It featured two small, precisely cut slits for the eyes, allowing the wearer to navigate her surroundings while completely concealing her facial features from the public gaze. When a procession of noble ladies rode on horseback through the countryside, they appeared to any onlookers as a silent, ghostly vanguard of faceless black silhouettes, moving through the green landscape like living shadows. This stark, monochrome contrast not only protected their physical bodies, but created an intense, untouchable barrier of exclusivity, separating the hidden countenance of the elite from the common gaze of the world. The most fascinating and profound aspect of the vizard lay in its internal mechanics and the severe physical discipline it demanded from the woman who wore it. The mask possessed no ribbons, straps, or silver buckles to secure it behind the head. To attach it mechanically would ruin the smooth, unbroken line of her elaborate headdress. Instead, a small silver tongue or a single glass bead was fastened to the inner lining of the mask, directly behind the mouth slit. To hold the mask in place against her face, the lady had to physically bite down on this bead, keeping her teeth clamped firmly upon it for hours at a time as her carriage jolted along the rough medieval roads. This structural requirement transformed the pursuit of beauty into a mandatory vow of absolute silence. While wearing the vizard, a noblewoman could not speak, laugh, or offer a casual greeting to her companions without dropping her defense and exposing her face to the sun. Her thoughts were entirely locked behind a wall of black velvet and clenched silver. This silence, however, was not viewed as a submissive restriction. Rather, it was interpreted by courtly society as the ultimate expression of aristocratic self-control, dignity, and mystery. A woman who could ride for leagues in perfect, unflinching stillness demonstrated an immense command over her own body, trading the casual freedom of speech for the supreme preservation of her untouchable visual purity. When the destination was finally reached, and the procession safely entered the cool, shaded sanctuary of the great hall, the ladies would release their bite, removing the black masks to reveal faces that were entirely cool, pale, and untouched by the harshness of the journey. The sudden transition from the eerie, faceless black oval to the radiant, soft warmth of a perfectly preserved porcelain face was a carefully calculated piece of courtly theatre. It proved to the assembled court that the elements of nature held no power over the bodies of the ruling class, that through discipline, silence, and art they could glide through the wild, unpredictable world, completely unblemished and perpetually refined. As you drift deeper into the comforting, velvety darkness of your own evening, watching the final sleepy glows of the fireplace dissolve into shadow, contemplate this quiet discipline of the past. Imagine the profound stillness of a mind locked behind a mask of velvet, listening only to the rhythmic clip-clop of horses' hooves and the sound of one's own breath. It was a world that understood that true grace often demanded a willingness to surrender speech for stillness, and that behind the silent, rigid boundaries of custom lay a deep, unquenchable desire to protect the spark of human beauty from the eroding forces of time and the world outside. As the structural complexity of court life reached its absolute zenith, the human face became more than just a canvas for health and purity. It was transformed into a sophisticated, readable map of political alignment and romantic availability. In the twilight of the medieval era, a fascinating and subtle cosmetic phenomenon emerged among the high nobility of Western Europe: the use of courtly patches, known in the French-influenced courts as mouches or flies. These were tiny, meticulously cut pieces of black silk, velvet, or taffeta, backed with a gentle adhesive made from gum arabic, designed to be pressed directly onto the pale painted skin of the face. What began as a practical medical necessity to conceal the permanent scars left by smallpox and burning skin ointments quickly evolved into a brilliant, unspoken language of desire and social intrigue. To appreciate the genius of the mouche, one must understand the intense visual scrutiny that defined every interaction in the Great Hall. In a world where a single wrong word could lead to political exile or a deadly duel, the elite learned to communicate through symbols. The stark midnight black texture of a silk patch pressed against a face, heavily coated in white lead ceruse, created an immediate, hypnotic point of contrast. It drew the observer's eye directly to a specific feature, the curve of a cheek, the dimple of a chin, or the sharpness of an eye, magnifying the natural movements of the facial muscles under the warm, flickering glow of the evening candles. As the custom deepened, the shape and placement of these black patches were codified into an intricate, silent alphabet of personality. A tiny silk crescent moon placed near the corner of the eye signalled to the court that the wearer was a person of deep, melancholic intellect given to the contemplation of philosophy and poetry. A small star pressed near the edge of the lips indicated a playful, witty disposition, inviting light-hearted banter and courtly flirting. If a lady placed a patch directly on her right cheek, she was announcing her status as a married woman, fiercely loyal to her husband's house. If placed on the left, she signalled that she was open to the elegant, highly stylized advances of courtly lovers and troubadours. The creation and storage of these patches became a luxury industry in itself. Wealthy aristocrats carried small, pocket-sized patch boxes crafted from hammered silver, mother-of-pearl, or delicate tortoiseshell shell. Inside these boxes, lined with soft velvet, lay dozens of pre-cut shapes, hearts, diamonds, crosses, and even miniature silhouettes of birds or coaches. The inside lid of the box was invariably fitted with a small convex glass mirror, allowing a lord or lady to discreetly check their reflection during a banquet and adjust the placement of their patches, ensuring that the signals they were broadcasting to the room remained perfectly aligned with their shifting political alliances. This practice represented the ultimate triumph of the artificial over the natural. The medieval elite had successfully taken the physical imperfections of disease and aging, the deep pits and scars that reminded humanity of its biological vulnerability, and converted them into tools of supreme elegance and power. They did not simply hide their flaws, they highlighted them, wrapping them in luxurious fabrics and transforming them into badges of honor and wit. It was a philosophy that refused to accept the body as nature delivered it, insisting that every square inch of the human presentation could be disciplined, orchestrated, and made to serve the grand, enduring performance of the court. As you rest in the deepening, undisturbed stillness of your room tonight, watching the soft golden light of the fire play across the dark corners, imagine the quiet drama of that ancient hall. Picture a nobleman leaning forward across a heavy oak table, his eyes tracking the subtle shift of a black silk star on a lady's cheek as she tilts her head in the candlelight. It was a world where even a tiny fragment of cloth held the power to alter the course of a lineage, and where the human face was treated as a beautifully written manuscript filled with secrets, codes, and timeless whispers of ambition, romance, and majestic grace. As the late medieval world grew ever more refined, the grand theatre of aristocratic appearance began to look inward, focusing on the smallest, most fleeting movements of daily life. The pursuit of beauty was no longer satisfied by heavy robes or towering headdresses alone. It demanded that every spontaneous gesture, a wave of the hand, a tilt of the head, or a quiet sigh be accompanied by a sensory experience that left an indelible mark upon the court. This desire for total aesthetic control led to the widespread adoption of one of the most delicate and intimate luxuries of the period, the scented handkerchief and the pomander ring. Through these tiny, exquisitely crafted objects, the nobility achieved the ultimate synthesis of physical defense and poetic elegance, turning a simple breath into a masterclass of political staging. The scented handkerchief was a marvel of textile artistry and botanical engineering, crafted from the finest, near-translucent flax linen imported from Flanders, or delicate silks from the trade ports of Venice. These small squares of fabric were far too valuable to be used for ordinary hygiene. Instead, they were treated as mobile scent diffusers, Before a grand ball or a royal council, the handkerchiefs were steeped for days in concentrated waters distilled from jasmine petals, orange blossoms, and white rose oil. When dry, the fabric held the fragrance deeply within its threads, releasing a subtle, highly concentrated cloud of sweetness whenever it was unfolded or waved through the air. For a high-born lady, the manipulation of the scented handkerchief was an essential skill taught from early childhood. As she sat in the crowded, sweat-filled galleries of a tournament or walked through the damp corridors of a castle, she would casually hold the linen cloth near her face. To the casual observer, it appeared as a gesture of pure, fragile grace, a poetic framing of her pale features against the stark white fabric. In reality, it was a rigorous physical shield. By breathing through the flower-steeped linen, she filtered out the harsh, stagnant air of the medieval environment, creating a private microclimate of pure fragrance that protected her from the dangerous miasmas believed to carry disease and moral decay. For the gentlemen of the court, this pocket-sized defence took an even more compact architectural form, the pomander ring. Moving away from the heavy spheres worn at the waist, master goldsmiths began to forge heavy signet rings containing hidden miniature chambers beneath the central gemstone. By pressing a tiny spring, the emerald or ruby lid would pop open, revealing a small cavity packed with a highly concentrated paste of ambergris, civet, and pulverized nutmeg. During intense political negotiations or when passing through the unwashed crowds of the outer courtyards, a lord could casually rest his hand against his chin, his nose hovering just millimeters above his ring, inhaling a continuous stream of royal fragrance that kept his mind sharp, focused, and completely insulated from the chaotic smells of the lower classes. The public display of these scented accessories served to draw a sharp, psychological line between the ruler and the ruled. To possess a body that constantly radiated the scent of exotic eastern spices and rare summer flowers, even in the dead of a freezing winter, was an undeniable declaration of cosmic favour and economic supremacy. It told anyone who came near that the aristocrat existed in an entirely different sensory reality than the common labourer, whose world was defined by the smell of wet wool, wood smoke, and earth. The act of lifting a scented cloth to one's nose became the ultimate gesture of aristocratic aloofness, a silent, graceful way of saying that the air of the common world was simply not pure enough for a noble soul to breathe. As you sink into the profound, undisturbed quiet of your own space tonight, watching the soft golden light of the fire fade into gentle shadows, imagine the subtle rustle of a silk handkerchief infused with the ghost of ancient jasmines. Think of how a single ring could hold a fortress of fragrance against the entire world outside. It was an era that refused to allow even a passing breeze to remain untamed, converting the simple biological necessity of drawing breath into a beautiful strategic performance of dignity, power, and timeless majesty. As the visual grammar of the high courts reached its most intricate and sophisticated expression, the nobility realized that true power lay not just in being seen, but in controlling exactly how and when one was observed. This philosophical shift gave rise to an accessory that was part architectural shield, part diplomatic weapon, and entirely mesmerizing the courtly emerging in the final decades of the medieval era through trade routes that connected Europe with the luxury markets of Byzantium and the East. The fan evolved from a simple tool for cooling the skin into an absolute necessity of aristocratic deportment, transforming the simple movement of the hand into a complex, choreographic dance of secrecy and command. The earliest medieval fans of the high elite were not the folding structures of later centuries, but rigid, majestic vanes crafted from exotic peacock feathers, white ostrich plumes, or stretched vellum painted with delicate gold leaf. These feathers were mounted onto long, highly ornamental handles carved from solid ivory, polished silver, or rare woods scented with sandalwood oils. When a lady of high birth held her feather fan during a royal tournament, she was not merely fanning away the heat of the summer afternoon. She was surrounded by a shifting, iridescent halo of colour that framed her upper body, instantly elevating her presence above the crowd and drawing the eye of every knight in the arena. However, the true genius of the fan lay in its function as a device for spatial and conversational boundary control. Within the crowded, hyper-vigilant atmosphere of the great hall, where walls literally had ears and rival factions watched every breath for signs of political weakness, the fan became a private sanctuary. By lifting a large plume of ostrich feathers to the level of her chin, a noblewoman could instantly obscure the movement of her lips from court gossips and royal spies. Behind this luxurious barrier of white down, she could whisper critical political warnings to an ally, receive an illicit romantic message from a suitor, or deliver a freezing, sarcastic remark to a rival, all while maintaining an exterior appearance of absolute, unbothered serenity to the rest of the room. As the custom matured, the manipulation of the fan generated an intricate, universally understood language of gestures, a silent code that allowed the elite to communicate across the vast, noisy spaces of a banquet hall without uttering a single sound. To hold the fan closed against the left cheek signalled a quiet, absolute warning that danger was approaching and that an alliance must be hidden. To open the fan slowly, revealing only a fraction of its painted surface, indicated that a lord or lady was willing to grant an audience for private negotiations later in the evening. Conversely, a sudden sharp closing of the fan against the palm cut through the air, like a small clap of thunder, signalling a royal displeasure that could instantly silence an entire section of the room. The fan also served as a tool for managing the physical challenges of the medieval banquet. Beneath the heavy weight of wool and silk robes, and under the intense heat generated by hundreds of wax candles and massive roaring hearths, the air in the great halls could quickly become suffocating. By generating a continuous, gentle current of air, the fan kept the lady's skin cool, preventing her white lead foundation from melting or running down her face, and ensuring her features remained as static and flawless as a marble statue. The gentle breeze also dispersed the heavy scents of her perfume, her violet oils and musk, creating a localized sphere of fragrance that moved with her through the crowded spaces, enforcing her physical and social boundaries wherever she walked. As you rest in the deep, velvety quiet of your own space tonight, watching the soft, golden embers of the fireplace breathe their final warm glows into the room, imagine the slow, elegant sweep of those ancient feathers through the dim air. Picture the sharp contrast of iridescent green peacock eyes against the dark stone walls of a castle hall. It was a world that understood that true grace was an active, strategic art, a world where a simple cluster of feathers held the power to shield a secret, spark a romance, or command the silent obedience of an entire court, leaving an enduring legacy of mystery, power, and timeless majesty. As the visual, olfactory, and gestural arts of the high courts reached their absolute peak, the medieval understanding of beauty expanded to conquer the final, most intimate human sense, the sense of touch. In the twilight of the Middle Ages, the ruling class realized that true majesty was not merely something to be viewed from a distance or whispered about in the shadows. It had to be felt, experienced, and worn as a physical weight that altered the very physics of human movement. This philosophy gave rise to the ultimate expression of tactile luxury, the grand, fur-lined ceremonial cloak. Through the strategic combination of heavy, fluid velvets and the rarest, softest pelts nature could provide, the aristocracy transformed the act of walking into a mesmerizing performance of material supremacy. To understand the immense power of these garments, one must look at the strict sumptuary laws that governed medieval society. Furs were not chosen merely for warmth, they were precisely graded by royal decree to reflect the exact spiritual and political rank of the wearer. The most sacred and coveted of these was ermine, the winter coat of the stoat, which turned a flawless, blinding white save for the jet-black tip of its tail. Ermine was reserved almost exclusively for royalty and high-ranking dukes. When a king moved through the grand hall, the interior of his heavy crimson cloak was fully lined with this snowy pelt, creating a stark, brilliant contrast that framed his body, symbolizing a moral purity and an unearthly cleanliness that was entirely separate from the dust of the lower world. Beneath the king, the high nobility favoured there, the patterned bluish-grey and white fur of the Siberian squirrel, arranged by master furriers into complex, geometric checkerboard designs that rippled with light whenever the wearer turned. For the lesser nobility, the soft pelts of foxes, martens and sables were utilised, each treated with fragrant oils of cedar and dried lavender to eliminate any animal scent. These linings were encased in outer shells of heavy Italian velvet, stiff brocades and silks woven with actual silver wire. The resulting garments were incredibly heavy, often weighing 40 to 50 pounds, forcing the wearer into a slow, measured and deeply imposing stride, the definitive regal gait that demanded immediate deference from everyone in the room. The relationship between the heavy outer fabric and the soft inner fur created a fascinating psychological and sensory barrier for the aristocrat. Wrapped in these massive cloaks, a lord or lady was completely insulated from the harsh, cold drafts that permanently whipped through the stone corridors of medieval castles. As they moved, the soft fur slid smoothly against their fine linen undergarments and bare skin, providing a continuous private sensation of comforting warmth and luxury that kept their physical composure completely serene, even during grueling, multi-hour religious services or political audiences in the dead of winter. This tactile majesty was also designed for public impact through the art of the gesture. During a courtly dance or a formal greeting, a nobleman would casually throw back one side of his cloak over his shoulder, exposing the smooth, shimmering white of the ermine lining or the intricate pattern of the vair beneath. This swift, calculated movement was known as the reveal, a dramatic display of hidden wealth that showed the court that the interior of their garments, the part hidden from casual eyes, was just as flawlessly engineered and staggeringly expensive as the exterior. It was a statement of total, uncompromising perfection, proving that their noble identity was woven into the very fabric of their daily existence. As you lie restfully in the deep, undisturbed calm of your own room tonight, watching the soft, golden light of the fire fade into gentle shadows, imagine the absolute weight and softness of those ancient robes. Picture the slow, fluid sweep of heavy velvet across a cold stone floor, and feel the phantom touch of soft, snow-white fur against the skin. It was a world that understood that beauty was an immersive, total experience, a world where the clothes a person wore were not merely a defense against the weather, but a majestic, tactile fortress that preserved the grace of the body, elevated the spirit, and commanded the silent, awe-struck reverence of an entire kingdom. As we reach the literal and symbolic apex of the medieval aesthetic hierarchy, we must raise our eyes to the highest point of the human form, the crown and the complex architecture of hair jewellery. In the high courts of Europe, the head was treated not merely as a part of the anatomy, but as a sacred throne for the intellect, the spirit, and the divine right of rule. To adorn the head was an act of cosmic significance. The crowns, coronets, and gem-encrusted tiaras of the late Middle Ages were far more than simple metal bands used to signal political dominance. They were sophisticated instruments of light engineering, precisely designed to interact with the human hair and the dancing fires of the great hall to create a literal, shimmering halo around the ruler's countenance. The design of these royal headpieces was deeply rooted in the medieval science of lapidary symbolism, where every gemstone was believed to hold a distinct spiritual frequency and protective power. Gold, the incorruptible metal that never tarnished, served as the structural foundation, hammered thin or twisted into delicate filigree that mimicked the organic vines of paradise. Within this golden framework, master goldsmiths set precious stones with rigorous intention. Deep red rubies representing the sacred blood of Christ and the fiery courage of the warrior were placed at the structural peaks. Alternating with them were vast blue sapphires, symbolizing the purity of the celestial sky and the calm, unwavering justice of the monarch's mind. However, The visual magic of these crowns was only fully realized when combined with the intricate styling of the hair beneath. For noblewomen whose hair was grown to incredible lengths, the locks were woven into dense, complex braids that were coiled tightly around the sides of the head or arranged into twin towers known as hennins. Before the crown was placed, these braids were threaded with thin ribbons of solid silver and pinned with delicate gold bodkins tipped with fresh river pearls. When the heavy gem-encrusted crown was finally lowered onto this structural foundation of hair, the gems did not sit isolated, they nested within a shimmering canvas of metallic threads and dark, lustrous tresses that caught and multiplied every fracture of light. This orchestration of jewelry achieved its maximum hypnotic effect during the nightly state banquets. As the king or queen tilted their head to speak to an ambassador or turned to observe a courtly dance, the faceted surfaces of the rubies and sapphires intercepted the warm amber glow of the towering beeswax candles. The crown did not simply shine, it cast rapid, dancing beams of coloured light across the smooth, white-painted forehead of the ruler and onto the cold stone walls behind them. To the observers standing in the smoky shadows of the great hall, the effect was deeply spiritual. The monarch appeared to be floating within a self-generated aura of heavenly fire, a visual proof that they were indeed chosen by the divine to stand between the earthly realm and the stars. For the high knights and princes who did not wear full crowns, the display of head jewellery took the form of the chapeau, a luxurious velvet hat adorned with a single massive brooch known as an ensigne. These brooches, crafted from gold and enamel, often depicted sacred geometric symbols, hunting falcons or family crests, holding in place a cascading spray of white heron feathers. The feathers danced with every stride, adding a dynamic, weightless verticality to the man's stature, while the central gemstone of the brooch acted as a single piercing point of light right above his brow, drawing the gaze of all who approached and commanding an immediate silent bow of reverence. As you rest in the deep, unbothered calm of your own room tonight, watching the final sleepy embers of the fireplace breathe their warm orange light into the darkness, imagine the heavy, majestic weight of that ancient gold pressing against the brow. Picture the dazzling flashes of ruby red and sapphire blue cutting through the soft candle smoke of a forgotten century. It was a world that understood that to truly govern, one had to master the art of the spectacle, a world where the head was crowned not just with power, but with a calculated celestial beauty that turned the fragile human form into an enduring radiant monument of majesty and timeless grace. As we push deeper into the refined complexities of the late medieval courtly experience, we find that the elite were not content with merely absorbing light through their gems or shielding it with their veils. They sought to actively capture, bend, and throw light as a highly sophisticated weapon of social navigation. This desire to manipulate the luminous environment gave rise to a specialized, brilliant practice involving the pocket mirror. Moving away from the heavy, large discs kept in private bedchambers, master craftsmen in Venice and Paris began to create miniature palm-sized mirrors made of highly polished steel or early lead-backed glass. Encased in exquisite circular boxes of carved ivory or chased silver, these tiny instruments became the ultimate tools for a silent, dazzling choreography of reflected light. To understand the strategic value of the pocket mirror, one must picture the immense, shadow-drenched architecture of the great feast halls. While the central tables were brightly illuminated by towering candelabras, the outer perimeters, the deep window embrasures, and the gallery levels remained wrapped in a dense, smoky twilight. In this environment of sharp contrasts, a single concentrated beam of light was instantly noticeable. Aristocrats quickly realized that by holding a small mirror at a precise angle beneath the fabric of their wide sleeves, they could catch the flame of a distant candle and project a sharp, dancing dot of light across the vast room, directing it onto a specific stone pillar, a tapestry, or the shoulder of another courtier. This technique developed into an unspoken, highly secretive code used by lovers, conspirators, and political allies to communicate across crowded spaces without moving a step or making a sound. A steady, unmoving point of light held against a far wall signalled an urgent request for a private meeting in the outer gardens. A rapid, rhythmic flickering of the beam across a nearby pillar served as a quiet, critical warning that a royal spy or a political rival was approaching and that a sensitive conversation must immediately cease. The pocket mirror effectively turned the ambient candlelight of the castle into a private network of visual whispers, entirely invisible to those who did not know how to read the patterns of the gleam. The boxes that contained these mirrors were marvels of courtly art designed to be displayed as symbols of wit and intellectual refinement. The ivory lids were deeply carved with intricate miniature narratives depicting the assault on the castle of love, where knights threw roses instead of stones at a fortress defended by ladies, or scenes of trysting lovers sitting beneath weeping willows. When a lady opened her ivory case during a banquet, the act was a deliberate performance. The smooth white texture of the carved ivory highlighted the softness of her pale fingers, while the sudden reveal of the silver mirror surface created a bright flash that momentarily drew the eyes of the entire table to her, asserting her presence and her mastery over the court's visual space. Beyond its use as a communication device, the pocket mirror allowed the nobility to maintain their rigorous standards of physical composure throughout grueling, hours-long ceremonies. Without modern restrooms or public vanity spaces, an aristocrat was expected to remain flawless from the first toast of the banquet to the final dance of the dawn. By discreetly tilting the small ivory box within the palm of their hand, a lord or lady could check the alignment of their hair jewels, ensure their white lead base had not run, and verify that their black silk patches remained perfectly positioned. It provided a private, continuous reassurance that their physical armour of beauty remained completely unbroken, allowing them to project an image of absolute, effortless perfection to the watching world. As you rest in the deep, undisturbed peace of your own room tonight, watching the soft, golden light of the fire play across the ceiling, imagine holding one of those tiny, heavy discs of ivory and silver. Picture the sharp, concentrated beam of candlelight leaping away from your hand, cutting through the heavy smoke of a medieval hall to deliver a secret message to a waiting ally. It was a world that refused to leave even a stray reflection to chance, converting the physics of light into a beautiful, strategic art form, a timeless reminder of an era that looked upon the world not just as it appeared, but as a vast, enchanted canvas waiting to be orchestrated, mastered, and brought into a state of majestic, enduring grace. As the first pale rays of the medieval dawn broke through the narrow stone slits of the castle tower, dissolving the deep shadows of the night, the daily resurrection of the aristocratic identity began not with a public display, but with a highly private, serene communion between the individual and the element of water. Long before the technological mastery of the Renaissance made large, flat glass mirrors a standard feature of the wealthy home, the high nobility relied on an older, more poetic method to view and perfect their physical forms. Each morning, inside the quiet sanctuary of the bedchamber, personal attendants would prepare the ritual of the silver basin and the double-distilled rosewater, converting the simple act of self-examination into a sacred, peaceful art of reflection and skin restoration. The preparation for this morning ritual began long before the lord or lady opened their eyes. At the setting of the sun the previous evening, servants would gather fresh, unbroken red and white rose petals from the castle's enclosed gardens, capturing them while they were still heavy with the sweet fragrance of the summer air. These petals were placed into heavy copper alembics, where they underwent a slow, laborious double distillation process. The resulting fluid was not a mere perfume, but a highly concentrated, incredibly pure botanical water, free from any of the harsh mineral sediment found in the well water used by the common classes. It held the absolute, unchanging essence of the rose, carrying a deep, cooling properties that could instantly calm inflammation and awaken the skin. When the noble rose, this double distilled water was poured into a wide, shallow basin forged from highly polished sterling silver. The interior base of the basin was buffed to such a mirror-like sheen that when the clean water filled it, the surface became a flawless, liquid lens. As the morning light hit the water, the silver bottom reflected the image of the viewer back through the translucent, pink-tinted fluid. To look into the basin was to see one's own face framed by the gentle, shimmering reflection of the metal and the ghostly fragrance of 1,000 roses, creating a soft, incredibly flattering portrait that softened the sharp lines of fatigue and offered a peaceful, harmonious view of the self before the political battles of the day began. The noble user would lean over this silver pool, using their hands to gently scoop the cold, fragrant rosewater and splash it repeatedly across their face and neck. This action served a critical cosmetic purpose within the medieval beauty regimen. The shock of the cold water tightened the pores, reduced any puffiness beneath the eyes left by a night of heavy sleep, and brought a natural, healthy rush of blood to the surface of the skin, creating a bright, glowing rosiness that was highly prized in the courtly aesthetic. The natural sugars and acids in the rose distillation acted as a gentle skin toner, locking in moisture and leaving the entire face feeling firm, smooth, and heavily perfumed with a scent that would linger for hours. This private water ritual also held a profound symbolic value that set the tone for the aristocrat's entire daily deportment in a world that viewed cleanliness as an outward sign of an uncorrupted soul. Stepping forward to look into a clear, rose-scented pool was an act of moral alignment. It allowed the ruler to visually confirm that their physical vessel was pure, ordered, and ready to command the respect of their subjects. By washing away the residue of sleep with the finest essence of nature, they re-established their boundaries, separating their bodies from the coarse, unrefined realities of the lower world, and steps out into the great hall with a face that was completely tranquil, radiant, and fiercely composed. As you rest within the deep, protective quiet of your own space tonight, watching the soft, golden embers of the fire slowly fade into the velvet dark, imagine the cool touch of that silver pool in the early morning light. Picture your own reflection looking back at you through a veil of scented water, completely unbothered by the passage of time. It was an era that found a profound, spiritual beauty in the smallest interactions with the earth, transforming the simple necessity of washing into a majestic, timeless performance of grace and self-mastery that elevated the body and quieted the mind for the journey ahead. As the long, complex tapestry of the courtly day dissolved once more into the velvety embrace of the medieval night, the maintenance of beauty and majesty did not pause, it merely withdrew into a silent, structural alliance with the architecture of sleep. Within the private solar chambers of the high aristocracy, the transition from the public gaze to the isolation of the bed was managed with an almost scientific precision. The elite understood that the long hours spent in darkness could either erode or preserve the physical perfection they had displayed during the day. To ensure that the face remained smooth, the skin cool, and the elaborate hairstyles unbroken, they rejected the heavy, coarse cushions of the common folk, relying instead on the specialized art of the herbal satin pillow. The construction of these noble pillows was a delicate craft that balanced physical comfort with botanical medicine. The outer casing was invariably tailored from the finest Italian satin or heavy silk brocade, chosen specifically because its ultra-smooth, friction-free texture would not tug at the delicate skin of the face or snag the intricate braids of hair that women spent hours preparing. Inside this luxurious shell, instead of ordinary straw or rough animal hair, the pillows were stuffed with a meticulously balanced mixture of soft down feathers gathered from the breasts of nesting swans, combined with a dense aromatic blend of dried botanicals, roots of the violet-scented orris, wild mint leaves, and golden petals of calendula. This botanical filling served a profound cosmetic function throughout the night. The medieval medical theory of the humours dictated that an excess of heat during sleep would cause the body to sweat, leading to a dull, yellowed complexion and breaking down the natural oils of the skin. The inclusion of dried mint and orris root acted as a continuous, gentle cooling system. As the noble rested their head upon the satin, the natural warmth of their skin activated the herbs, releasing a dry, crisp vapour that lowered the temperature of the face, prevented nocturnal perspiration, and kept the skin feeling tight, fresh, and completely unblemished by morning. The physical shape of the pillow was equally calculated to preserve the structure of the face. Unlike modern plush pillows that swallow the head and crush the cheeks against the fabric, creating deep, permanent sleep lines, medieval noble pillows were often small, firm and cylindrical, designed to be placed precisely beneath the nape of the neck. This positioning elevated the head slightly and kept the face looking directly upward toward the canopy of the bed. By preventing the face from pressing into the mattress, this architectural support eliminated the formation of wrinkles, allowed the skin to breathe in perfect isolation, and ensured that any cosmetic oils or violet salves applied before bed remained entirely undisturbed upon the skin. This preoccupation with the physics of rest turned the bedchamber into a highly functional preservation chamber. When a lady laid her head upon her herbal satin cylinder, she was stepping into a localized environment where nature was entirely tamed to serve her youth. Surrounded by the scent of fresh mint and the smooth protection of silk, her body entered a state of suspended animation, safe from the damp, cold air of the castle walls. It was a beautiful, silent discipline that understood that to command the morning with a face of radiant, unbothered tranquillity, one had to govern the night with equal vigilance, converting the simple act of resting into a timeless strategy of aesthetic survival. As you sink into the deep, restorative comfort of your own evening, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the night air around you, imagine the cool, smooth touch of that ancient satin against your skin. Feel the dry, refreshing scent of mint and wild herbs rising from beneath your head, clearing your mind and wrapping your thoughts in a protective shroud of green peace. It was a world that recognized that true majesty was a continuous, unbroken performance, a timeless truth that even in the deepest, most vulnerable hours of darkness, the pursuit of grace, order, and absolute beauty never closed its eyes. Before the heavy velvet curtains of the great state bed were finally drawn shut, sealing the aristocrat away from the nocturnal chill of the stone castle, one final, deeply secretive ritual of physical sealing was performed. The pursuit of medieval perfection recognized that the eyes and the mouth remained vulnerable to the invisible invading drafts of the night air, even while the spirit slept. To ensure that the morning would reveal a countenance of unmarred clarity, the personal physicians and attendants of the high nobility formulated a series of specialized nighttime elixirs and protective eyelid salves, transforming the final minutes of consciousness into an absolute lock against physical decay. The care of the eyes during the long hours of darkness was treated with immense delicacy. Because the draughty architecture of medieval fortresses required massive hearths that left the air heavy with lingering ash particles and invisible wood smoke, nobles often awoke with dry, inflamed or crusty eyelids, a visual defect that ruined the courtly ideal of bright, liquid eyes. To counteract this environmental hazard, ladies and lords applied a microscopic layer of protective salve to their eyelashes and brows before closing their eyes. This ointment was crafted by blending highly purified elderberry extracts with a base of refined fat or beeswax, scented faintly with lavender oil to promote deep, undisturbed sleep. This rich salve acted as an invisible defensive barrier. Throughout the night it prevented the smoky atmosphere of the chambers from drying out the sensitive skin of the eyelids, while simultaneously nourishing the roots of the lashes and brows, ensuring they remained thick, dark, and lustrous. A person who used this secret balm regularly would emerge from their bed covers with eyes that were immediately clear, soft and completely free from the puffiness or redness that plagued the lower classes who slept unprotected on floors of damp straw. It was a subtle, microscopic shield that maintained the structural beauty of the gaze, even in the depths of unconsciousness. Simultaneously, the mouth was subjected to a final rigorous purification. After the evening banquets where rich meats, spiced wines and heavy wheatbreads were consumed, the nobility rinsed their mouths with a potent bitter elixir distilled from myrrh, mastic tree resin, and wild sage leaves. Myrrh and mastic were highly prized for their natural antiseptic properties, capable of tightening the gums and preventing the invisible processes of decay that caused foul breath. By swishing this warm herbal distillation through their teeth for several minutes, the elite effectively sterilized their mouths, ensuring that the breath they released during sleep remained as fresh and clean as a shaded garden. This final act of application and rinsing completed the daily transformation of the human body into a highly disciplined monument of art and status. Every border of the flesh, from the crown of the head to the tips of the toes, from the surface of the skin to the interior of the mouth, had been systematically cleaned, scented, and sealed against the natural world. Wrapped in their linen sheets, cushioned by herbal satin, and protected by their botanical salves, the lords and ladies of the court did not merely sleep. They existed within a highly controlled defensive micro-universe of absolute luxury, waiting for the morning light to call them back to the public theatre of power. As you lie in the deepening, absolute stillness of your own room tonight, watching the very last sleepy flickers of the firelight melt into the velvet dark, feel the profound peace of this total closure. Imagine the cool, soothing touch of that ancient lavender salve, sealing your eyes against the cares of the world, and breathe in the ghost of sage and wild myrrh. It was a world that knew how to turn even the quietest, most hidden moments of life into a beautiful, strategic masterpiece of self-care, a timeless reminder that within the silent, protected spaces of the night, the human spirit can rest completely aligned, perfectly guarded, and beautifully prepared for whatever the dawn may bring. We have walked through the hidden corridors of time, peeling back the thick, heavy tapestries of myth to reveal the beating, disciplined heart of the medieval world. From the moon-white alabaster of the forehead to the meticulous alignment of the courtly patches, from the silent velvet of the vizard mask to the fragrant depths of the herbal satin pillows, we have witnessed an era that refused to accept the human body as mere biological happenstance. To the high nobility of the Middle Ages, the body was a sacred fiefdom, an architectural canvas that had to be continuously tamed, sculpted, and polished to reflect the invisible glory of the soul and the absolute legitimacy of royal blood. It was a world that understood with terrifying and beautiful clarity that beauty was never a matter of shallow vanity. In the high courts of Europe, the presentation of the self was a rigorous political strategy, a silent declaration of power, and an armour of statecraft. Every gesture, the slow wave of a painted feather fan, the deliberate reveal of an ermine cloak lining, or the flash of a pocket mirror catching the candlelight, was a calculated note in a grand, symphonic performance of majesty. It was a culture that looked into a silver basin filled with double-distilled rosewater and saw not just a face, but a monument to order, status, and timeless authority that could command the reverence of an entire kingdom. Now the grand banquet hall of the past is growing quiet. The hundreds of towering beeswax candles are being extinguished one by one, their warm amber flames dissolving into thin ribbons of fragrant white smoke. The heavy oak doors are being bolted against the midnight air, and the echoes of the lutes, the troubadours, and the courtly whispers are fading into the majestic, velvety silence of history. The long procession of knights in shimmering armour and ladies with braided silver hair has passed, leaving behind the enduring, radiant blueprints of their dedication to grace. As you lie completely relaxed in the deep, undisturbed sanctuary of your own modern room, let the weight of these ancient rituals wrap you in a profound, protective calm. The fire in your hearth has breathed its final sleepy sigh, leaving only a soft, comforting orange glow that slowly melts into the dark. Your journey through the secrets of the past is complete, and the chaotic noises of the outside world have entirely withdrawn, leaving you in a state of absolute, unbothered serenity. The discipline of the day is over, and the peaceful kingdom of the night now claims your thoughts. You are safely insulated, perfectly guarded, and deeply rested, carried away on a gentle tide of lavender, mint, and wild roses. Allow your mind to drift into the deep, restorative currents of sleep, knowing that the pursuit of beauty, harmony, and grace is an eternal flame that safely guards your rest. Close your eyes, let go of the waking world, and sink into the timeless, majestic peace of a dream. Good night, and may your rest be legendary. Sleepy History with Kevin is created for relaxation, entertainment, and sleep purposes. The stories shared on this channel are inspired by historical events, daily life, and real periods in history, but they may be simplified, adapted, or narrated in a calming way to enhance the listening experience. This content is not intended to be a precise academic or educational source. While we aim to stay generally accurate, some details may be altered for storytelling flow and relaxation. Please do not rely on this channel as a primary source for historical research or study. By listening, you acknowledge that this content is designed to help you unwind, relax, and fall asleep. Thank you for your understanding and support.